Hey friends! Glad you're here at Eclipse Wizardry. We've cooked up something special. What if Harry's Patronus revealed his 7 destined mates and ancient magic summoned them all? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Stag Sings. The room of requirement smelled like chalk dust and nervous energy. Harry had noticed that about the place. It picked up the emotional temperature of whoever filled it. Tonight, with 23 students pressed into a space that had obligingly stretched itself into something resembling a proper dueling hall, the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm decides what kind it wants to be. "Wands out," Harry said, and 23 wands came up. He still wasn't entirely used to that. The way they listened. The way they watched him like he actually knew what he was doing. He mostly did. That was the strangest part. "We've spent the last 3 weeks on patron uses," he continued, pacing slowly in front of them the way Lupin used to pace, not to perform authority, but because moving helped him think. "Most of you can manage the mist now. A few of you have got partial forms. Tonight I want to see if anyone can push past partial." He paused. "And before Hermione says it, practice makes permanent, not perfect," Hermione said from the front row, not looking up from the notes she was somehow still writing. What she said. A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Neville visibly relaxed. He'd been gripping his wand like it owed him money. The DA had settled into something Harry genuinely looked forward to, which was strange because Harry didn't look forward to much these days. Umbridge was still out there, pink and venomous, systematically dismantling the one place in his life that had ever made sense. Voldemort was back, and the Ministry was running full speed in the other direction. His scar throbbed like a second heartbeat on the bad nights. His dreams were dark and wet and full of corridors that went nowhere good. But here was different. Here he could do something. "Pair up for practice," he said. "I'll come round. Luna, Neville, work together, you've got the best track record tonight." He glanced at the far end of the room. "Ron, stop trying to teach Lavender the hand positioning and just demonstrate it." "I was demonstrating," Ron said, slightly pink. "You were holding her hand. That's demonstration." "Merlin help us all," Hermione muttered, finally looking up. Harry moved through the room, offering corrections here, encouragement there. He watched Colin Creevey manage a silver fox that streaked 6 feet before dissolving into mist and told him honestly that it was the best he'd seen it. He watched Ginny produce a crisp, confident horse that cantered twice around the room before she dispelled it with a satisfied flick. She'd mastered it weeks ago and was mostly here to help the others, which Harry appreciated more than he'd said. He crouched beside Neville and talked him through the memory work again, because Neville's problem was never the magic, it was believing the memory was enough. "It doesn't have to be the happiest moment of your life," Harry said quietly. "It just has to be real. It has to mean something." Neville thought about it. Then he cast. A silver bear lumbered out of his wand, solid and slow and absolutely enormous, and it turned and looked at Neville with something that was almost fond. Neville stared at it like he'd never seen himself clearly before. "There it is," Harry said. He straightened up. The room was humming along. He checked the time, they had another 40 minutes before people needed to filter back to their dormitories. He found himself at the front of the room again, wand loose in his hand, watching all of them work. Luna drifted over to stand beside him. She had that particular quality of hers where she appeared without making any sound, like she'd simply decided to exist in a new location. "You should cast yours again," she said. "I've already shown them the full form a dozen times." "I know." She tilted her head. Her spectrospecs were around her neck rather than on her face, which meant she was paying attention to something other than invisible creatures. "I think tonight is different. The air in here has a different quality. Less ordinary. More." She considered. "Title." Harry looked at her sideways. "Title. She wandered back toward Neville without any further explanation. Harry shook his head, which was his standard response to Luna, and then found himself raising his wand anyway. Because she wasn't usually wrong, was she? She was usually just early. He thought of the memory he always used, Sirius, in the moments just after the truth came out in the Shrieking Shack, when the man had said you can come live with me, and Harry had felt something he hadn't known he was missing suddenly slot into place. It was complicated now, with Sirius in hiding, with everything that had happened since. But the feeling inside the memory was still clean. Still true. Expecto Patronum. The stag came. It always came the same way, that surge of silver light that felt less like casting and more like opening a door, and then the stag was there, antlers first, hooves striking soundless sparks on the floor. Easily 8 feet at the shoulder. The room always felt smaller when it appeared, not because of its size, but because of its presence. Several first-timers had stepped back the first time they saw it. Harry had never fully understood why until Lupin had told him, quietly, that a corporeal Patronus on Harry's scale was genuinely unusual. Not impossible, just notable. Tonight the stag appeared, and then it didn't stop. Harry felt the surge, which was normal, and then felt it keep going, which was not. The silver light didn't stabilize. It built. The stag's form flickered, grew brighter, grew larger, until the light coming off it was less like moonlight and more like something standing too close to the sun. "Harry," Hermione said sharply. He heard her, but he couldn't answer, because the magic was moving through him like water through a gap, and he was about to say something was wrong except that nothing was. Nothing felt wrong. It felt like something had been waiting, patient and enormous, and had decided that now was the right time to stop waiting. The stag raised its head. And it sang. That was the only word for it. Sound came out of the silver creature that wasn't sound in any normal sense. It moved through the room the way warmth moves, touching everything, felt in the bones before it was heard in the ears. Not words. Not a melody anyone could have hummed afterward. Something older and more structural than either of those things, like the sound the earth would make if it chose to speak. Every person in the room stopped what they were doing. The stag's antlers lit up like a candelabra, igniting branch by branch, and then, 7 threads of pure silver light shot outward from the tips of the antlers. Not scattered randomly. Directed. Each one moved with the certainty of an arrow that already knew its target, and each one found its mark. Harry watched it happen and felt no panic, which surprised him. He felt, if anything, a deep bone-level recognition, like hearing a piece of music that you'd somehow always known but never been able to name. One thread hit Hermione in the chest. She gasped and pressed her hand over her sternum like she'd been struck, though there was clearly no pain. Her expression wasn't pain. It was something closer to being startled awake. One hit Luna, who simply looked down at the point of contact with mild interest, as though it had confirmed something she'd written in a personal notebook some time ago. One hit Ginny, whose horse Patronus flickered and vanished. She looked at Harry with very wide eyes, her hand flat against her chest. One hit Susan Bones, who was standing near the back wall and made a small involuntary sound that wasn't quite a word. One hit Parvati Patel. No, wait. Harry blinked. The thread had shifted in the air. It had started toward Parvati, veered, and struck someone else, Daphne Greengrass, who shouldn't have been in the room at all, who was standing in the far corner near the tapestry, and who looked, for the first time in Harry's memory, genuinely frightened. One struck the wall. Harry blinked. A thread hit the stone wall and went through it, as though the wall was nothing more substantial than smoke, and kept going. Distance clearly meant nothing to it. The 7th thread angled upward, toward the ceiling, and went through that too. Then the stag folded back into light, the light folded back into Harry's wand, and the room of requirement went completely silent. 23 people stared at him. Harry lowered his wand. "Right," he said. Hermione got to him first, which was expected, but she didn't say anything, which was not. She stood in front of him with her hand still pressed to her chest, and she looked at him with an expression he didn't have a word for. Something past thinking and into feeling, which for Hermione was always a slightly dangerous place to be. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, which was also not like her. "What was that?" "I don't know either." "That's not good enough, Harry." "Hermione, I cast the spell the same way I always do." "I don't know what happened." He looked around. The room was fragmenting into conversations, some alarmed, some excited. Luna was examining the spot on her chest with genuine scientific interest. Ginny was walking toward him with the expression she wore when she was deciding how she felt about something. Susan Bones was sitting down on one of the practice mats, staring at nothing. Daphne Greengrass was still in the corner. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. 2 years of ignoring each other across the castle, and suddenly she was in his DA meeting, which she hadn't been invited to, which meant she'd been following the map or someone had talked, or possibly the room itself had. "She's not supposed to be here," Ron said, coming up beside Harry. "Greengrass. She's not supposed to be here." "I know. Slytherin." "I'm aware, Ron. Could be a spy. Could have told Umbridge by now, she hasn't." Harry didn't know how he was sure of that, but he was. "Go check on Susan, she looks like she's about to fall over." He walked toward the corner. Daphne watched him come. She had brown eyes, he realized, which he genuinely hadn't known before. Her hair was dark blonde, almost brown, and she kept it pulled back in a plait that was currently somewhat loosened, as though she'd been somewhere in a hurry. She was in her school robes, but the outer layer was shoved in a bag she had over one shoulder, which meant she'd been moving fast when she arrived. "Greengrass," he said. "Potter," she said. Her voice was steady. She'd pulled her hand away from her chest and was standing with her arms crossed, which was either composure or the architecture of composure over something shakier underneath. He suspected the latter. "How did you find this room?" "I was following you." That was surprisingly direct. "Why?" "Because for the last 3 weeks I've been waking up at 2 in the morning with my wand warm in my hand and my chest doing something it's never done before, and every time it happens I can feel a direction." Her jaw was tight. "I'm not one of your," she gestured at the room, "enthusiasts. I didn't want to be here. But the feeling didn't care what I wanted." Harry looked at her steadily. "And then the thread hit you." "Yes." A short pause. "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet." "Find out." She uncrossed her arms, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. She stopped without turning around. "I have family complications that make my situation more dangerous than the others. If this thing, whatever it is going to affect my life, I need information before it becomes a problem I can't manage." "A beat. I'd appreciate discretion." "Greengrass." She looked over her shoulder. "Welcome to the DA," he said. She held his gaze for a second, and then she left. The meeting broke down 20 minutes early, which Harry accepted as inevitable. The Silver Thread event, he was already thinking of it that way, which told him something about how his brain was trying to keep itself calm, had the room's emotional temperature somewhere between exhilarated and terrified, and pushing productive practice past that point was pointless. He sent people back with instructions to not talk about it in the corridors, and watched them go in small clusters. Luna stayed behind to help him stack the practice cushions. "You knew," he said. "Not accusatory. Just observational." "Not specifically," she said. "I knew something was close. I've been reading about old magic, the kind that's older than spells, older than wand work. Primal magic, my father calls it. The sort that notices things." She balanced a cushion on top of a stack. "It's been noticing you for a while." "Noticing me. The way a river notices a new channel. Not choosing, exactly. Recognizing." She tilted her head. 2 of the threads didn't land in this room, did they? 1 went through the wall. 1 went through the ceiling. Luna nodded like he'd confirmed a crossword answer. There will be others, then. Elsewhere. They'll feel it too. She paused. The thread that hit me. It felt like, do you know when you read a book and you come to the sentence that you needed without knowing you were looking for it? Harry thought about it. Yeah. Like that, she said. Exactly like that. He was quiet for a moment. The room was emptying around them, the castle's helpful magic already beginning to shift the space back toward its neutral configuration. The practice mats rolled themselves. The cushion stack stabilized. What do you think it means? He asked. Honestly. Luna looked at him with her wide, silver-gray eyes that saw too much and minded it very little. I think it means you're not as alone as you've been insisting on being. And I think it means the magic around you is done waiting for you to figure that out on your own. She picked up her bag. I think that's probably a good thing, Harry. I know you'll be suspicious about that for a while first. She left him standing in the room of requirement with exactly 1 stack of practice cushions that hadn't sorted itself yet, because apparently even helpful castle magic had limits. He went to Dumbledore. Not because he wanted to, his feelings about Dumbledore this year were complicated and frequently furious, but because if anyone in the castle had a book on threads of silver light shooting out of Patronuses like something had gone structurally wrong with the space-time continuum, it was the headmaster. The gargoyle let him up before he even said the password, which either meant Dumbledore was expecting him or the castle was doing things on its own initiative tonight. Given the evening he'd had, he'd stopped ruling anything out. Dumbledore was at his desk. He was not, for once, doing the serene and composed act. He was standing behind his chair with his hands flat on the desk, and there were 3 of his portraits awake and murmuring behind him, and he looked like a man who had been waiting for news he'd been dreading and had just received it. Harry, he said. You already know, Harry said. I felt it. Dumbledore moved around the desk, slower than usual. He looked old tonight in a way he usually managed not to show. Sit down, please. I'd rather stand. Dumbledore looked at him, and for once didn't argue the point. He moved instead to the tall cabinet to the left of his desk and opened it. Inside were several shelves of books, but he went to a locked inner compartment and touched it with his wand in a pattern that looked personal and unrepeatable, and the lock gave. What he removed was not impressive to look at, a slim volume, almost pamphlet-sized, in covers that had gone the color of old bone. He set it on the desk between them. Before I explain, Dumbledore said, I want you to tell me what you felt. Harry crossed his arms. I felt the spell building beyond what I was putting into it. Like something was adding to it from another direction. And then there was this, he paused. It wasn't fear. It felt like recognition. Like the magic wasn't malfunctioning, it was doing something it was specifically built to do. Yes. Dumbledore sat down heavily. That is precisely what it was. He opened the old book to a page near the middle. The text was in Latin, but the illustration, a stag with threads radiating from its antlers, each thread ending in a small human figure, was comprehensible in any language. Harry stared at it. The vinculum anime, Dumbledore said. The Soul Constellation. A phenomenon documented 7 times in recorded magical history, and only among those whose magical core is, for lack of a better word, loud enough to attract the attention of primal magic. The primal magic that Luna was talking about. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened slightly. Miss Lovegood is perceptive, yes. The primal magic, what the founders called the prima vis, the first force, predates wand work, predates most of what we consider structured magic. It flows beneath everything the way water flows beneath stone. Occasionally it surfaces. Occasionally it makes choices. It chose 7 people, Harry said. It recognized 7 people. There is a distinction. Dumbledore's fingers moved over the old text. The prima vis does not manufacture connection, Harry. It identifies connection that already exists, in your magical signature, in the echo of who you are on a structural level, and it names it. Loudly, apparently. A pause. I have been watching for signs of this for 3 years. Since Privet Drive, actually. Since the night you survived something that nothing should have survived. Harry felt the familiar coal-hot irritation of another thing Dumbledore had been watching and not mentioning. He kept it contained. What does it mean for the people it marked? It means they are connected to you in ways that will grow more complex over time. The bond will deepen according to its own schedule. The 7 people it recognized are your, Dumbledore paused in a way that felt careful rather than uncertain, your constellation. The people around whom your magic orients itself. The people in whose presence your full potential can be realized. He met Harry's eyes. And before you ask, no, it cannot be reversed. The prima vis does not offer trial runs. I wasn't going to ask to reverse it, Harry said. Dumbledore looked slightly surprised, which Harry found satisfying. I was going to ask about the 2 threads that left the building. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. Yes. That is the complication I was hoping to postpone discussing. He stood and moved to the window, and for a moment he was just an old man looking out at the dark grounds. 1 thread, I believe, struck someone in the castle's extended environs, someone who has been within your magical orbit more recently than you might realize. The other traveled considerably farther. He turned back. Do you recall Fleur Delacour? Harry blinked. From the Triwizard Tournament? She's in France. She was in France this morning, Dumbledore said. I suspect by tomorrow she will be considerably less so. Harry opened his mouth and closed it again. The magic found who it found, Dumbledore said, and there was something almost gentle in it that Harry didn't know how to receive. I know this is not what you might have chosen, you don't know what I'd choose, Harry said. You've never asked. He picked up the old book before Dumbledore could object, tilted it toward the candlelight, and looked at the illustration again. 7 threads. 7 figures. The stag at the center with its head raised. I'm keeping this. He walked out. Dumbledore didn't call him back. Somewhere in the south of France, in a house that was all white walls and terracotta tile and the smell of lavender from the garden his mother kept with proprietary pride, Fleur Delacour woke up. She didn't usually wake up dramatically. She was a light sleeper by nature, a side effect of the Vila inheritance, her grandmother had told her, hyper-awareness as a survival mechanism, but she woke smoothly, already oriented, already knowing where everything was in the dark room before she opened her eyes. Tonight she opened her eyes because something had hit her. She sat up in bed with her hand pressed to her sternum and the absolutely unambiguous sensation of a silver thread pulling through her ribcage from east-northeast. She'd never felt anything like it. She'd been in the Triwizard Tournament. She'd been through a first task dragon and a second task lake bottom and a third task maze that still occasionally visited her dreams uninvited. None of it had felt like this. This felt like a compass finding north. She got out of bed and walked to her window. Opened the shutter. The French countryside was dark and quiet and smelled of the coming summer, and somewhere to the northeast, England, it felt like, somewhere in England, was a pull that her Vila inheritance recognized on a completely different level than her rational mind was prepared to deal with. Her rational mind had quite a lot to say about that. She went downstairs, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table until her younger sister Gabrielle patted down at 3 in the morning and found her there. You feel it too, Gabrielle said. Fleur looked up sharply. You felt it? Gabrielle sat across from her. She was 14, all angles and big eyes and the slightly otherworldly Delacour composure that their mother had cultivated in them both. She rubbed her chest absently. It woke me up. Less strong than yours, maybe. But it's there. Fleur's expression shifted into something protective. Gabby, it doesn't feel bad, Gabrielle said simply. It feels like a bookmark. Like something being set aside for later. She looked at her sister. You're going to go to England. I'm going to find out what happened, Fleur said, which was not quite the same thing. And then I'm going to make an informed decision. Gabrielle smiled in the way that meant she thought the distinction was adorable. Of course you are. Fleur drank her tea and looked out the dark window toward England. In the corridors of Hogwarts, 4 floors below Dumbledore's office and at an hour when no student was supposed to be walking them, Tonks was walking them. She was technically on order business. Dumbledore had her running security sweeps when she wasn't working shifts at the Ministry, which was exhausting, and she'd been doing it for months with little to show for it beyond intimate knowledge of every secret passage in the castle and an increasingly personal relationship with the poltergeist on the 4th floor, who respected her because she'd once accidentally transfigured herself into something even he found alarming. She had pink hair tonight, not professionally appropriate, but she wasn't in a professional mood. She had flat shoes because she kept tripping in heels and she'd given up performing competence in footwear. She had a Ministry-issue Auror cloak that she wore pushed back off her shoulders because she ran warm. She was turning the corner onto the 5th floor when it hit her like a physical thing. Not pain. Not quite. More like being tuned. Like a string being brought to the right pitch for the first time, and the resonance of it going all the way down. She grabbed the corridor wall and stood there for a moment, breathing carefully. The source was directional. Above her and to the right, which meant somewhere in the eastern tower, which meant, she catalogued the castle's layout with Auror precision, which meant the room of requirement. She stayed with her hand on the wall for long enough to confirm that she was not going to fall over, that this was not a magical attack, that everything seemed functionally operational if slightly rearranged at the molecular level. Then she straightened up. Adjusted her cloak. Made herself keep walking. She did not go to the room of requirement. There would be students there, and she was technically not an official presence in the castle, and it was approximately midnight and she was not going to walk into whatever that was in the middle of a student meeting. But she filed it. She filed the direction of it, the quality of it, the strange harmonic note it struck against something she'd never known was there to be struck. And she filed the fact that it had felt, quite distinctly, immediately, and unmistakably, like Harry Potter. Which was information she was going to need a long time and several cups of tea to figure out how to feel about, so she kept walking and decided to deal with it tomorrow. Harry sat on his bed in the 5th-year Gryffindor dormitory and did not sleep. Neville was already asleep. The Patronus had apparently used enough of his energy that he'd been unconscious within 30 seconds of hitting the bed. Seamus and Dean were murmuring about something near the window, and Ron was lying on his back staring at the ceiling with an expression Harry recognized as Ron trying to process something too large for comfort. "You're going to be fine," Harry said quietly. Ron turned his head. "I know that. The thread didn't hit you. I noticed." Ron was quiet for a moment. "Should I be worried about that? Like, do I need to go take a test or something, Ron?" Right, fine." He went back to staring at the ceiling. 7, though. 7. That's quite a lot, Harry." Harry looked at the old bone-covered book open on his lap. The illustration. The stag with its antlers like a chandelier. "Yeah. And 2 of them aren't even here yet." "I know." "Fleur Delacour," Ron said, with the careful tone of someone trying to determine whether something is a problem or a spectacular development. "Fleur Delacour." "Ron, I'm just noting it, I'm not complaining, He stopped. Started again. "You're alright, yeah? This isn't, you're not upset about this?" Harry considered the question seriously, because it deserved that. He thought about the moment the magic had moved through him, that bone-deep recognition, that sense of something vast and patient finally deciding to act. He thought about Hermione's face when the thread hit her, the way she'd looked at him with something she hadn't had words for. Luna's quiet certainty. Even Daphne Greengrass, frightened but still standing, still there. The thread going through the wall toward someone in the corridor. The thread disappearing through the ceiling toward France. "I'm not upset," he said, and it was true. He was uncertain. He was processing. He was aware that this was going to make his already extraordinarily complicated life more complicated in ways he couldn't entirely predict. But underneath all of that, underneath the processing and the uncertainty and the incoming freight train of implications, there was something steady. Something that felt, with enormous improbability, like ground. He hadn't had a lot of ground lately. "No," he said. "I'm not upset." Ron looked at him for a moment, and then something in his best friend's face settled into decision. "Okay," Ron said. "Then we figure it out." "Same as always." "Same as always," Harry agreed. He closed the old book. The candles in the dormitory burned low, and Harry Potter lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling, and somewhere in the walls of the old castle the magic breathed and waited, because it had been waiting for a very long time and a few more hours was nothing to it, and it was patient in the way that rivers are patient, and certain in the way that deep water is certain, and it had found what it was looking for and it was done pretending otherwise. Outside, the grounds of Hogwarts lay still and dark. The forbidden forest held its breath. The stars were very clear. And far below, in a vault that no one was supposed to know about and that no one had opened in 400 years, something old and cold and not entirely sane felt the pulse of the prima vis moving through the stone above it and turned its face upward toward the warmth. It had been waiting too. Not the same way. Not for the same reasons. But it had found what it was looking for as well, and it was very, very good at being patient. Chapter 2, The Pulled Threads. The morning after the DA meeting, Hogwarts had the particular charged quality of a place where something had happened and everyone could feel it but nobody was saying it out loud yet. Harry noticed it at breakfast. The way the marked ones moved differently. Hermione had dark circles and a stack of books she'd clearly pulled from the library before 7 in the morning, which was saying something even for her. Ginny was quiet in a way that wasn't her natural quiet. It was a watching quiet, a processing quiet, the kind that meant something was running behind her eyes at full speed. Luna arrived at the Ravenclaw table, sat down, poured herself pumpkin juice, and looked across the hall directly at Harry with the calm expression of someone who had slept excellently and confirmed all their hypotheses. Susan Bones was absent from the Hufflepuff table. Harry made a note of that. Daphne Greengrass was at the Slytherin table in her usual seat beside her friend Tracy Davis, looking, to all external appearances, exactly as she always did, composed, slightly remote, conducting her morning with the practiced precision of someone who had decided long ago that showing anything was a strategic liability. But she was eating nothing. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of tea and she was staring at it rather than drinking it, and twice while Harry watched she touched her chest briefly, unconsciously, the way you touch a bruise to check if it's still there. It was still there. Harry knew that without checking, because his was too, a warmth, low and steady, like an ember that had been placed carefully and wasn't going out. "Stop staring at the Slytherin table," Ron said, spooning porridge with the focused dedication of someone who had decided the best response to a complicated world was a good breakfast. "I was checking on Greengrass. She looks fine. She's not eating." Ron glanced across, considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "She's Slytherin. Maybe they don't eat in front of witnesses. That's not a thing. It could be a thing." He pointed his spoon at the books Hermione was reading. "What are those?" Hermione looked up briefly. "Primal Magic Theory, Historical Documentation of the Vinculum Anime, which I found in 3 different sources last night, none of which entirely agree on the mechanics, and a text on ancient soul bond law that I had to request from the restricted section by sending a very carefully worded note to Madame Pants at 6 in the morning." She turned a page. She was not pleased. "You're angry," Harry said. Hermione's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm researching." "Those are different things for most people." "Harry." She put the book down and looked at him directly, and he saw what was actually under the research and the dark circles. Not anger exactly. Something more complicated than anger. You could have told me. If you'd been feeling something building, if the magic around you had been doing something unusual, I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't. It happened the same way it happens every time until it didn't. She held his eyes for a moment. Whatever she was measuring, she apparently found the answer acceptable, because she picked her book back up. I know, she said, more quietly. I know you didn't plan it. I'm just, a pause. I need to understand things, Harry. That's not going to change. I know. He slid a piece of toast onto her plate, because she wasn't eating either. What have you found? She accepted the toast without looking at it. The vinculum anime has been documented 7 times in magical history, which you probably already know from whatever Dumbledore gave you last night. Yes, I know you went to Dumbledore, you had that look this morning. She ignored his expression. In 5 of the 7 cases, the bonded constellation became something extraordinary. In the other 2, it fractured before it could consolidate. She paused. In both fractured cases, it was because the anchor, the person at the center, tried to manage it alone. Harry absorbed that. So the message is don't manage it alone. The message, Hermione said, in the tone she used when she was saying something she'd decided to say despite it costing her, is that this works better when you trust the people it chose. She met his eyes over the book. Which I realize is complicated for you. But there it is. He didn't have a response to that wasn't either dismissive or more honest than he was ready to be at 7 in the morning, so he drank his coffee and let it stand. He found Susan Bones in the courtyard off the east wing, sitting on a stone bench with her hands in her lap and her face tilted up toward the pale March sky. She wasn't crying. She was past crying, by the look of her. She had the hollowed-out quality of someone who'd already done that work privately and was now just sitting with what was left. Harry sat down beside her without asking if she minded. She glanced at him. Potter. Bones. A beat. A jackdaw landed on the courtyard wall and immediately left again, apparently finding the emotional atmosphere insufficiently entertaining. My aunt, Susan said. Amelia Bones. She's head of the DMLE. She's been on a list. I know she's been on a list. She was looking at the sky again. Since Voldemort came back, I know she's on a list of people he'll go after when he decides to start. And after last night she stopped. Pressed her hands flat on her thighs. I keep feeling like it matters more now. Like there's more at stake than there already was, which I didn't think was possible. Harry was quiet for a moment. He knew what that felt like, the mathematics of love under war conditions, calculating the odds of people you couldn't afford to lose. She's good at what she does, he said finally. Your aunt. Dumbledore said she's one of the most capable people in the ministry. Good people die in wars, Susan said, not unkindly but without any softness either. That's rather the point of them. She looked at him then, really looked, with eyes that were frankly evaluating. Last night. What you felt when it happened. Was it against your will? He considered the question with the seriousness she'd asked it with. No, he said. It felt more like magic did something it had permission to do from a level I didn't know existed. Not forced. More like remembered. She considered this. I don't know how I feel about it, she said. I want to be honest about that. I appreciate that. I also want to say that I don't, she paused, choosing words carefully. I don't know you well, Potter. You're not just a person to me, you're also a symbol and a cause and a risk assessment and at least 3 things my aunt has mentioned in professional contexts. Adding, she gestured between them, this on top of all of that is a great deal to absorb. Yeah, he said. That's fair. But the thread, she said, and her hand came up to touch her chest briefly, that same unconscious gesture he'd seen from Daphne. It felt real. It felt like something that knew something. A short silence. I've been doing a lot of things because they seemed strategically correct. Helping Ernie with the DA. Being steady for people who were scared. Since the graveyard and the return, I've been, she looked for the word, functional. On purpose. Something shifted in her expression. Last night was the first time something felt true rather than functional. Harry looked at her, this girl he'd shared a school with for 5 years and barely spoken to, with her red hair and her careful eyes and the grief she was holding at a studied distance, and thought about what Hermione had said about trusting the people the magic had chosen. It's real, he said. Whatever it is, it's real. I can't tell you more than that yet because I don't know more yet. But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen or manage you into not caring about it. Susan Bones looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then she nodded, once, with the definitiveness of someone making a decision. All right, she said. That's enough for now. She stood up. I'm going to be late for charms. He let her go, and then sat for a moment alone in the courtyard, feeling the warmth of the bond's ember and thinking about functional versus true, and which one he'd been being, and for how long. The parchment appeared on his desk in the middle of double potions. Not the desk inside the classroom, Snape's dungeon, where everyone sat in assigned misery, but tucked under his actual study copy of the textbook, which meant it had been placed there magically and with some precision. He unfolded it under the table while Snape was writing on the board, and felt Ron lean over immediately. Potter. Greenhouse 3. Free period after lunch. Come alone or don't come. Gee, he folded it back up. Ron gave him a questioning look. Harry mouthed Greengrass and Ron's eyebrows performed a small athletic event. Snape turned around. Mr. Potter. Is there something about the draft of Living Death that requires your sotto voce commentary? I wasn't talking, sir. And yet your lips were moving. Reading, Harry said. I read aloud sometimes. Helps it stick. The silence in the dungeon had the quality of a held breath. Snape looked at him with the expression of someone who has decided that an argument is not worth having because the other party is clearly not going to give ground, which Harry suspected might have been a new experience for Snape. 10 points from Gryffindor for disruption, Snape said, because he needed to say something. Of course, sir, Harry said pleasantly. Ron kicked him under the table in what was either warning or respect. Probably both. Greenhouse 3 smelled of damp earth and the particular green humidity of things that grew without being asked to. The venomous tentacula along the east wall had been pruned back for the season and looked resentful about it. Harry pushed through the main door and found Daphne already there, standing in the center of the space with her arms crossed and a very specific expression on her face, the one that meant she was about to say something she'd decided to say but would have preferred not to. I looked it up, she said, without preamble. Good morning to you too. The vinculum anime. I looked it up. I have access to books you don't because my family has a library with things that the Hogwarts restricted section considers harmless. She uncrossed one arm to gesture. Are you aware of the activation cascade? Harry came farther into the greenhouse and leaned against a potting bench. Tell me what you found. The bond doesn't consolidate immediately. It moves in stages, the initial marking, then a deepening that happens through proximity and shared experience over time. The final stage, the full consolidation, requires what the old texts call a moment of genuine extremity. She looked at him. Meaning danger. Real danger. The kind the magic can feel. A pause. We are currently in a war with the most dangerous dark wizard in living memory, so that particular requirement is probably not going to be difficult to meet. No, Harry said. The part that matters for me, Daphne said, and here her voice changed, still level, still controlled, but with something underneath it that was doing work to stay there, is the exposure risk. If it becomes known, to certain people, that a Greengrass daughter has a soul bond with Harry Potter, it will be used. My family is in a complicated position. She met his eyes directly. My father has Death Eater affiliations. Pragmatic ones, not ideological. He doesn't care about blood purity, he cares about survival, and he's bet on the wrong side because he thought it was the only side. Her jaw was tight. I don't share his politics, but I share his name, and if Voldemort or his people decide that I'm useful leverage against you, they're not finding out, Harry said. You can't guarantee, no one in the DA will say anything. They know the cost of it. Daphne looked at him with something that was almost frustration. You're very confident in people. I'm confident in those people, Harry said. There's a difference. He paused. How did you get from Death Eater family to Hogwarts without being in the Dark Arts Club yourself? Her chin came up slightly. Carefully, she said. And with a great deal of strategic silence. A beat. I don't want what he's offering. I never did. I just had to be very quiet about that while living in a house full of people who did. Harry looked at her for a long moment. A girl who'd spent 5 years being very quiet about who she actually was, surrounded by people who'd have used the truth against her. He recognized something in that, not the specifics but the texture of it, the weight of performing the expected thing because the alternative had costs you couldn't pay. I know something about that, he said. Daphne looked at him like she was revising an estimate. Yes, she said, more quietly. I suppose you do. So here's what I can offer, Harry said. I'm not going to tell anyone about your family situation. What's between us, whatever this is, doesn't get used against you. If the situation with your father becomes dangerous, tell me, and we'll deal with it. He held her eyes. And I don't manage people into pretending they're fine with things they're not fine with, so if you have problems with this, say them. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know you well enough to have decided how I feel about you. That's fine. I find the bond somewhat presumptuous on the magic's part. Agreed. And I don't do well with people who expect me to be grateful or compliant. Then we'll get along, Harry said. Because I don't expect either of those things. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, not yet, but the particular unlocking of a door that has been tested and found solid. All right, she said. I can work with that. She picked up her bag. There's one more thing. She stopped with her hand on the greenhouse door. My younger sister Astoria. She's 3rd year. She doesn't know about any of this and I want to keep it that way until I know it's safe to tell her. Done, Harry said. Daphne Greengrass walked out of Greenhouse 3 and back into the castle, and Harry stood for a moment in the green smell of growing things and thought that the magic had interesting taste in people, and that he was increasingly of the opinion that it knew what it was doing. Fleur Delacour arrived at the castle gates at 4:30 in the afternoon. Harry heard about it before he saw it, because word traveled fast in Hogwarts and the word was Fleur Delacour is at the front gates and she doesn't look like she's there for a casual visit and Professor Sprout is trying to explain to her why she can't just walk in and it's not going particularly well. He got there before anyone else from the DA, which meant he got there before Hermione, which almost never happened. Fleur was standing at the wrought iron gates with the particular quality of someone who has decided that an obstacle is not an obstacle but merely a temporary inconvenience currently being dealt with. She was in traveling clothes, dark coat, hair loose, a small bag over one shoulder, and she was looking at Professor Sprout with the polite, fixed attention of someone who is listening carefully to every word being said and being entirely unmoved by them. She was also, Harry noticed, gripping the gate with one hand in a way that had nothing to do with wanting to enter the castle and everything to do with the fact that she was standing closer to the source of the thread and the bond was pulling and she was working fairly hard to look like it wasn't. Professor Sprout saw Harry coming across the grounds. Mr. Potter. Perhaps you can explain to Miss Delacour. It's all right, Professor, Harry said. I'll handle it. Sprout looked uncertain. Fleur looked at Harry for the first time, and something in her expression shifted, the controlled surface cracking just slightly, the way ice shifts over water when the temperature changes. "Potter," she said. "Delacour." He stopped a few feet from the gate. "You felt the thread." "Obviously I felt the thread," she said, clipped and precise. "I felt it in France. I was asleep and something hit me like a, she made a gesture that was expressive in the way that French gestures often are, encompassing both physical impact and existential inconvenience. "I was in France, Potter. Do you understand? I came across the channel because my chest decided we had unfinished business." Her eyes were sharp and blue-gray and doing significant work to maintain composure. "Explain." "I will. Come in. Your professor is suggesting I can't." Harry looked at Sprout. "She's order adjacent and she's here because of something that's directly connected to me. I'll take responsibility." Sprout looked at him, looked at Fleur, looked at the determined expression of a Partvila who had traveled internationally on no notice, and made the administratively sensible decision. "I'll need to tell the headmaster." "He already knows," Harry said. "Or he will in about 10 minutes. Please." Sprout opened the gate. Fleur walked in and fell into step beside Harry across the grounds, and there was a moment of silence between them that was doing quite a lot of work. "I remember you," she said finally. "From the tournament. You were the youngest champion. You were very," she considered, "determined." "I was terrified," Harry said. "Yes, but you were determined while being terrified, which is more useful." She glanced at him sideways. "I was not kind to you during the tournament. I was not kind to most people during the tournament. I was under considerable pressure and I handled it by being difficult. I didn't take it personally. You should have. It was personal. A beat. I'm saying I'm sorry for it. Now. Before this becomes anything, I'm saying that." Harry looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, chin up, the apology delivered with the same directness she'd brought everything else. No softening, no qualification. Just the thing itself. "Accepted," he said. "And for what it's worth, I always thought you got short-changed in the coverage. The papers were brutal." Her jaw tightened. The papers did not understand that a Vila which in competition is not performing for anyone. "I was there to win." A short pause. "I did not win. Neither did I, technically. I tied. I came last," Fleur said. "The maze was," she stopped. "The maze was difficult." He knew what had been in the maze. He knew, in ways he didn't talk about, exactly how difficult it had been in ways that had nothing to do with the actual obstacles. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It was." They walked in silence for a moment, and the castle rose ahead of them against the grey March sky, and the thread between them pulsed with the warm certainty of something that had been waiting. "What happens now?" Fleur asked. "You stay. If you can. There are things you need to know and things I need to understand, and I think both of those go better in person." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you it's simple. It's not. I have never been told that my life would be simple," Fleur said. "I would not have believed it." She looked at the castle. "I will need to contact my family. My mother will worry. My sister," a pause. "My sister Gabrielle. She felt it too. Differently from me, less strong. I need to understand what that means." "We will," Harry said. "I promise." Fleur looked at him sharply, the way people look when they're evaluating whether a promise is real or reflexive. Whatever she found, she didn't argue the point. "All right, Potter." "Harry." A pause. "Harry," she said, as if trying the word for size. "Fleur," he said. They went inside. Tonks found him after dinner. She appeared beside him in the corridor outside the great hall with the particular aura skill of materializing without announcement, except instead of her usual energy, the brightness she wore like a second skin. She was quieter tonight, more inward. Her hair was a muted dusty pink rather than the vivid fuchsia she usually went for. "Walk with me," she said. They ended up in a side corridor near the library, empty of students, the torches burning low. "Last night," Tonks said, without looking at him. "I was doing my sweep on the 5th floor and something hit me." She tapped her sternum. "Directional. Clear as anything. Came from the east tower." She finally looked at him. "That was you?" Harry nodded. "I've been trying to figure out how I feel about that all day," she said. "I've come up with approximately 17 positions and rejected all of them." She leaned her shoulder against the wall. "I'm an auror, Harry. You're 17. Not yet. 15. Even less ideal," she said, with genuine distress. "And I'm 22, and I'm technically in a professional capacity in this building." "The bond doesn't activate," Harry said. "Not immediately. From what I've read, it deepens over time. For now it's just a recognition." "A recognition." She said it like the word itself was suspicious. "Like the magic knows what it found and is patient about the rest," he said. "I know this isn't what you'd have chosen. I know this is complicated and I know the age thing is complicated and I'm not asking you to be anything you're not." Tonks looked at him for a long moment. Her hair shifted slightly, the automatic tell of her metamorphmagus nature, shifting with her feelings. It went from dusty pink to something darker, more uncertain. "The thing is," she said, "I've always," she stopped. Started again. "I've been coming to this castle since September and part of me has been watching you and trying to figure out what it is about you that feels so," she gestured expressively. "You're not 17 on the inside, Harry. That's the problem. The war's made you older than you should be, and when I look at you I don't see a student, I see someone who's been carrying things that would break most adults, and," she rubbed her face. "I am not dealing with this well." "You're dealing with it exactly how you should," Harry said. "Honestly." She dropped her hand and looked at him. "How are you so calm about this?" "I'm not calm," he said. "I'm just decided. The magic is real, the people it chose are real, and I'm not going to waste time pretending none of it happened." He met her eyes. "But I also mean it when I say I'm not asking you for anything right now. We don't even really know each other." "We could fix that," Tonks said, somewhat reluctantly. "Yeah," he said. "We could." She was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed, a short, real sound, the first fully genuine thing she'd expressed in the conversation. "Right. Okay. So we're just, what, friends who are also bonded by ancient magic? Is that the worst thing you can think of?" "I can think of worse things," she admitted. Her hair shifted back toward the brighter pink, almost automatically, like a mood ring that had decided what mood it was in. "For what it's worth, when it hit me, it didn't feel wrong. It felt," she looked for words, "like it was about time." Harry smiled, which surprised both of them slightly. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it felt like." He found Hermione in the library at 9 o'clock. She'd been there since after dinner, judging by the tower of books and the impressive quantity of annotated parchment spread across the table. She looked up when he sat across from her, and they regarded each other with the ease of 6 years' worth of knowing, the particular comfort of two people who don't need the preliminaries. "You've talked to all of them today," she said. "How did you know?" "Because you look like you've been having the same conversation 6 different ways and it's given you the slightly overprocessed expression you get after emotional labor." She said it without heat, just as observation. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," he said. They're all taking it seriously. They're not panicking." "I am," Hermione said crisply. "For the record." "I know. But you're panicking productively. She gave him the look that meant she was deciding whether to be annoyed or amused. The soul bond law, she said, pulling a specific text forward. I want to explain something and I need you to actually listen. I'm listening. She opened the text to a marked page. In the cases where the vinculum anime consolidated fully, the 5 out of 7, the anchor's magical capability increased dramatically. Not incrementally. Dramatically. In one account from the 16th century, witch who had been considered moderately powerful became one of the most magically capable individuals of her generation. She looked up. Harry, you're all ready. I've watched you cast things that shouldn't be possible at our level. If this consolidates, then I'll be more useful in the war, Harry said. That's not what I was going to say. What were you going to say? Hermione was quiet for a moment. The library breathed around them, the old books shifting gently in their self-sorting sections. I was going to say that power isn't the point. The point is that the bond makes the anchor whole in ways the magic recognizes are missing. She looked at him carefully. The magic chose 7 specific people. It didn't choose them because they make you powerful. It chose them because you're incomplete without them in ways you've probably learned not to notice. A pause. Which is not a criticism. Harry absorbed this. The ember of the bond was steady in his chest, and in the library's quiet he could almost feel the distributed warmth of it, Hermione across the table, and the others spread through the castle and the grounds and somewhere in the east wing where he'd put Fleur for the night, and the faintest thread going all the way to wherever Gabrielle Delacour was sleeping in France, dormant and waiting and patient. You've always understood me better than you let yourself believe, he said. Hermione blinked. What? Something you said last night is what I meant. He looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he hadn't quite let himself, because Hermione was so constantly, foundationally there that sometimes the looking got obscured by the having. The thread hit you first. She was very still. Of all the people in that room, he said. First. The magic probably just, proximity, or, she stopped. He watched her be honest with herself, which was the thing Hermione did better than almost anyone when she stopped being afraid of what the honesty cost. I know, she said quietly. I know it wasn't proximity. No, he said. It wasn't. They sat with that for a moment. Not resolving anything, not making any declarations. Just letting the truth of it sit in the room with them without either of them running from it. Okay, Hermione said finally. She closed the book and stacked it with the others with the small precise movements she made when she was reorganizing herself internally. There's one more thing I found and it's the one that's been worrying me all day. Tell me. She opened a different text, older, the pages the color of old tea. The vinculum anime, in the recorded historical instances, it doesn't arise randomly. It arises as a response. The prima vis doesn't wake up for nothing. She turned the book so he could see the text, and pointed to a passage in Latin that she'd translated in the margin in her tiny, precise handwriting. He read her translation. The Soul Constellation forms when the world's need is great enough that a single anchor cannot hold against what comes. When the magic recognizes a darkness that cannot be answered by one alone, it gathers those who answer together what one cannot answer apart. Harry looked up. Something's coming, Hermione said. Something the magic is responding to. Something it's been preparing for. She held his eyes. And I don't think it's just Voldemort. The library felt very quiet around them. Somewhere below them, deep in the ground beneath Hogwarts, in the dark of a vault that had been forgotten and was now, gradually, insufficiently so, something smiled with a face that had been still for 400 years. It had heard them. Not the words, sound didn't travel through that much stone. But the bond. The bond it could feel, spreading through the building above like warmth through metal, strengthening, gathering, the constellation forming precisely as the old records had said it would. Good, it thought, in a language that predated English by several centuries. Let it form. let it grow strong. It had the patience of the genuinely, fundamentally immortal, which was a different patience from any Harry had encountered yet. And it was just beginning to wake up. Chapter 3, The Vault Beneath. Dumbledore summoned Harry on a Tuesday. Not through McGonagall, not through a note left on his desk or a portrait message, but directly. Harry was crossing the 3rd floor on his way to Charms when the castle itself seemed to redirect him. The staircase he meant to take swung away with a groaning of ancient stone, and the one that replaced it led up and kept going until there was only one destination it could plausibly be offering. He went. The headmaster's office was fuller than he'd ever seen it. Dumbledore was at his desk, but Professor McGonagall was standing by the window with her arms crossed and an expression suggesting she was deeply unhappy about something and had been for several hours. Fleur was seated in the chair closest to the fire, which she'd claimed without being invited, which Harry was starting to understand was simply how Fleur operated. She'd been at Hogwarts for 3 days now, sleeping in a guest room off the hospital wing that Madame Pomfrey had opened with the tight expression of someone who had given up asking why extraordinary things kept happening in her building. The surprise was Kingsley Shacklebolt. He was standing near the cabinet where Dumbledore kept the bone-colored book, tall and still in his aura robes, with the particular quality of a person who is very calm because they have decided that calm is what the situation requires. He looked at Harry when he came in and gave a small, measured nod. "Sit down, Harry," Dumbledore said. "I'd rather, I know," Dumbledore said, without impatience. "Sit down anyway. What I need to show you is better received from a stable position." Harry sat. Fleur caught his eye and gave a fractional lift of her brow that meant, "I also don't know what this is yet. I've been here for 20 minutes and the old man is being theatrical about it." Dumbledore placed 3 things on the desk between them. The first was the old bone-covered book Harry had already seen. The second was a rolled piece of parchment that had the official seal of the Department of Mysteries pressed into dark wax at its center. The third was a drawing, not painted, not transfigured, but drawn by hand in something that looked like old blood, on a piece of stone that had been chipped away from a larger surface. The drawing was of a face. Harry looked at it and felt a cold finger touch the back of his neck, because the face was looking back at him. Not in the animated way of magical portraits. In the way of something that had been drawn by someone who had spent a long time being watched and was trying to record what watching felt like. The face was angular and hollow-cheeked, with eyes that were open too wide, and something about the proportions was slightly wrong in a way that the brain kept trying to correct and failing. "Who is that?" Harry asked. "His name," Dumbledore said, "is Malachar. He had several surnames over the course of his lifetime, and he would likely tell you that none of them were accurate, because they all came from other people's attempts to classify him." Dumbledore settled back in his chair. He was born approximately 900 years ago, in the early years of Hogwarts' founding. He was, by all contemporary accounts, one of the most magically gifted individuals of his generation. "Was," Harry said. "Is," Dumbledore corrected quietly. "That is the problem." McGonagall turned from the window. "The vault beneath the school," she said, in the clipped tone of someone who has been holding this inside too long, "was not in any school document I've had access to in 30 years at this institution. I found it in Dumbledore's private archive. There are references to it in records from the 15th century, and then nothing for 400 years, as though someone decided the best record-keeping policy was forgetting it existed." "The vault was sealed," Kingsley said, speaking for the first time. His voice was unhurried, like slow water. "Approximately 430 years ago, by a council that included members of all 4 houses and 3 ministry predecessors. The sealing was deliberate and comprehensive, and it held until," he glanced at Dumbledore. "Until 3 weeks ago," Dumbledore said. "When someone entered the subterranean passages beneath the school while searching for something else entirely, and inadvertently broke the outermost ward layer." Harry looked at him. "Someone." Dumbledore met his eyes steadily. "A member of the Order. Someone who had received information suggesting there was a weapon against Voldemort hidden in the old passages, information that turned out to be, at best, incomplete. They were not reckless, Harry. They were desperate, and there is a difference. A pause. It was serious. The name landed in the room and stayed there. Harry kept his expression level through an act of will that was becoming more practiced. Is he unhurt? Dumbledore said immediately. Physically unhurt and entirely ignorant of what he disturbed, because the outermost ward breaking didn't produce any immediate effects. It was not until your Patronus, he paused. The prima vis moving through the castle at that magnitude weakened the next 3 layers simultaneously. What was a crack became something considerably more significant. Harry looked at the drawing on the desk. The wrong-proportioned face. The 2 wide eyes. What did you do with him? Malachar. He was not killed, McGonagall said, with the specific disapproval of someone who thinks this was the wrong call. He cannot be killed. He found a method of anchoring himself to continued existence approximately 600 years ago, in a way that predates and in some respects exceeds what Voldemort achieved with his Horcruxes. The council that sealed him couldn't destroy him. They contained him. And now he's partially not contained, Harry said. The inner seals hold, Kingsley said. For now. He cannot leave the vault. But he can hear. He can feel. And he can, a pause, chosen carefully. Communicate. With receptive minds. Harry thought about the whisper in the walls Hermione had mentioned, the cold thing he'd felt on the edges of sleep twice this week that he'd attributed to Voldemort's presence in his head and now was possibly something else entirely. Communicate how? Dreams, Dumbledore said. Reflective surfaces. And through magical signatures that are, for lack of a better word, loud enough for him to locate. He looked at Harry in a way that carried an apology he wasn't quite saying. He can hear the bond, Harry. The vinculum anime, it is precisely what he has been waiting for. What he was contained for searching. He was sealed because he was hunting it, Harry said, remembering the outline he'd read in the old book. He thought the Soul Constellation would give him access to a power beyond death. He was right, Dumbledore said, and the room went very quiet. In the abstract. A fully consolidated vinculum anime generates a form of magic that has no conventional limits, it operates outside the normal boundaries of what spells can do, because it isn't a spell. It's structural. Foundational. And someone who could take that power, rather than earn it through the bond, he let the implication finish itself. Harry stared at the drawing. The drawing seemed to look back. I need to see the vault, Harry said. Harry, not to open it. Not to interact with whatever's in it. I need to see the physical reality of this. He stood up. I need to understand what we're actually dealing with, not what I'm being told about it in the abstract, because I've learned the hard way that the abstract version is usually missing the part that matters most. He looked at Dumbledore. And you know I'm right about that. The room was quiet for a moment, and then McGonagall made a small sound that was almost certainly agreement. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then he stood. Kingsley, he said, would you accompany us? Kingsley picked up his wand without a word. Fleur stood up too. Miss Delacour, Dumbledore began. I am bonded to him, Fleur said, in the tone of someone making a structural argument rather than an emotional appeal. Which means my magical signature is connected to his, which means if your vault creature can hear him then it can hear me also, and I would rather understand what I am dealing with from a position of information than ignorance. She looked at Dumbledore with the composed certainty of someone who has already won the argument and is just waiting for the other party to realize it. I am also a trained curse-breaker candidate and I speak intermediate Latin. I will be useful. Dumbledore looked at her. He looked at Harry. She's right, Harry said. Dumbledore gestured toward the door. The entrance to the subterranean passages was behind the mirror on the 4th floor, not the mirror of Ariste, but a smaller, older mirror in a corridor most students used as a shortcut between the library and the charms classroom. It had always looked ordinary. It looked ordinary now. Kingsley touched its frame with his wand in a sequence Harry committed to memory immediately, and the mirror swung inward on a dark staircase that went down at an angle steep enough to require care. The passage smelled of deep stone and cold water and something else, something older, a mineral sharpness that had no surface world equivalent. They went down for a long time. The light came from Dumbledore's wand, and it was steady and sufficient, but it didn't reach the ceiling, which meant the ceiling was very far up. Harry kept his own wand out. Beside him, Fleur had hers drawn too, and she moved through the dark with the Veela's natural awareness of space, rarely touching the wall, oriented by instincts that were older than her wand training. "How far?" Harry asked quietly. "The vault chamber is directly beneath the Great Hall," Kingsley said. "Approximately 60 feet below the castle foundations." That was a long way down. That was a committed distance. The staircase opened into a passage that widened into something that might once have been impressive and was now simply very old, stone columns in a double row, carved with symbols that Harry's light caught in fragments. He recognized some of them as runic. Others were something else, older than runes, and they pulsed faintly when his wand light touched them, like something registering warmth. "Those wards," Fleur said quietly, nodding at the columns. "They're still active." "The outer ones are damaged," Kingsley confirmed. "The inner 3 layers remain intact. That is what is containing him." They came to the vault door. It was enormous. Not tall but wide, and made of a black stone Harry didn't have a name for, with 7 locks set into it at different heights. 6 of the locks had been opened, he could see where the mechanisms had been released, the stone around them fractured. The 7th lock was intact, and around it the remaining wards blazed in a cold blue light that pulsed with a slow, deep rhythm. Like breathing. Harry stood in front of the vault door and felt it. He'd expected dread. He'd expected the cold finger on the back of the neck again, the wrongness of it. He felt those things, yes, but underneath them was something else. A clarity. An assessment. This was the problem. This was the specific, physical, containable thing. He could see it, measure it, plan around it. He was not afraid of it. "Harry," Fleur said quietly, and her hand touched his arm briefly, not clinging, just marking presence. He nodded. Then the voice came. Not from the vault door. From everywhere, from the stone itself, from the columns, from the faint resonance of the pulsing wards, as though the rock had decided to use its vibrations as language. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "There you are." Harry didn't step back. He looked at the vault door. "Malachar," he said. The silence after it had a quality of pleased surprise. "You know my name." The old man has been busy. A pause, and the voice had a texture Harry filed away, not evil in the performative sense Voldemort sometimes went for. Thoughtful. Patient. Almost conversational, the way someone is conversational when they have a great deal of time and a specific interest. "Come closer, boy. I want to hear you better." "That's not happening," Harry said. "No?" Not offended. Curious. "Most people who come down here back away when I speak." "You didn't." "I'm not most people. I know exactly what you are." The voice moved through the stone, and Harry had the distinct impression of something very large occupying a small space and being entirely unconcerned about it. "I've been waiting for you for 4 centuries, Harry Potter. I've been waiting for the constellation to form. I felt it the night your Patronus sang, felt it the way you'd feel sunlight after a very long winter. And now that you've felt it," Harry said, "what do you want with it?" A pause. Then, almost gently, "To be free. You were sealed because you were going to use the bond to make yourself unchallengeable," Harry said. "To take the power of the constellation for yourself. That's not a reason I'm going to help you with." "The people who sealed me were afraid of what I would become," Malachar said, and there was something in it that was almost reasonable, which was the most dangerous kind of argument. Power beyond conventional limits. Power that could reshape the magical world. They couldn't control it, so they buried it. That is what institutions always do with what they cannot control. Harry, Dumbledore said, very quietly. You don't need to engage, he's talking to me, Harry said. Not unkindly, but definitely finally. He looked at the vault door. Tell me something true, he said to it. If you want a conversation, give me something real. The pause that followed was long enough that Harry thought it was over. Then, the seventh seal. The voice was quieter. It isn't a lock. It's a key. The council that sealed me didn't just contain me, they bound something to the seal. Something they took from me. Another pause. My anchor. My own constellation. 4 people I'd bonded to before I understood what I was doing with the power. They're in here with me. The rock's vibration changed frequency, very slightly. I'm not the only one who's been here for 400 years. The cold in the passage deepened. Harry stared at the 7th lock. The blue light pulsed. That's not something I can verify, he said. And even if it's true, it doesn't change the risk. No, Malachar agreed, and the voice was very old and very tired and very patient all at once. It doesn't. I'm simply telling you what's true. A beat. Go away, boy. Come back when you've thought about it. I'm not going anywhere. Harry looked at the 7th lock for another moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the staircase. Nobody spoke until they were back in the passage with the columns, and then it was Fleur. He's not lying, she said. Harry looked at her. About the others in the vault. Her expression was carefully measured. I can feel it. Not his thoughts, his signature. The Vila sense isn't only beauty and compulsion, it's also truth-reading at a primal level. He wasn't performing that. Which makes him more dangerous, not less, Kingsley said. Yes, Fleur agreed. But it also makes him a different kind of problem than a simple monster. She glanced at Harry. He has a reason. He's not just dark for the sake of darkness. Voldemort has a reason too, Harry said. It doesn't make his reasons acceptable. No, Fleur said. But it makes him predictable. Which is more useful. Harry looked at her and felt a click of recognition, not the bond's warmth, though that was there too, but the specific recognition of encountering a mind that processes things the same way your own does, just from a different angle. Yeah, he said. It does. He called a full DA meeting that evening, which was unusual. They typically met 3 times a week and tonight was an off night. The message went out through the coin system Hermione had set up, and they assembled in the room of requirement with the particular energy of people who know something has shifted and are waiting to find out what. Harry didn't do preamble. There's something beneath the school, he said, standing in front of them in the large cleared space. Something old and dangerous that's been sealed for 4 centuries and is now partially not sealed. It can hear the bond, the thing that happened with the Patronus. It's using that to orient itself. He paused. Its name is Malachar. He was one of the most powerful wizards of the Hogwarts founding era. He couldn't be killed, so he was contained, and now the containment is compromised. The room was very quiet. This doesn't replace Voldemort as a threat, Harry continued. Voldemort is still out there and still the war we're fighting. This is a second problem that happens to be in the same building as us. He looked around the room. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's in the castle with you. And because some of you, his eyes moved to Hermione, to Luna, to Ginny, to Susan, to Daphne standing slightly to the side with her arms crossed, are going to be directly relevant to this. Neville raised his hand. What does he want? His freedom, Harry said. And the power the bond generates once it fully consolidates. He thinks if he can access that power, he can free himself from his containment completely. Can he? Hermione asked. I don't know yet. But we're not waiting to find out. What do we do? Ron asked from the second row. Harry looked at him, and at all of them, 23 faces, some frightened, some determined, all here because they'd chosen to be here even when it was easier to stay in their dormitories. We train harder, he said. We get better. And we figure out what Malachar wants with the bond specifically, because information is always the advantage we have over people who underestimate us. I have 17 books already, Hermione said. Give me another day. Obviously, Harry said. Thank you. A small ripple of something, not quite laughter, not quite relief, but the particular loosening that comes from a group of people who trust each other being reminded that they trust each other. Luna put her hand up. I know where to find more information about Malachar than the library has, she said. Harry looked at her. Where? She smiled. The Forbidden Forest. Of course, Ron said. After the meeting, Harry found a quiet corner and sat with his back against the wall and thought, with the clarity he was getting better at accessing, the clarity that came when he stopped managing his own reaction to things and just let himself see them straight. The vault. The sealed door. The seventh lock that wasn't a lock. The voice in the stone, 900 years old and patient in a way that was genuinely alarming, saying I'm not the only one who's been here for 400 years. He took out the bone-colored book. He'd been carrying it with him since Dumbledore's office, and he'd been reading it in pieces between classes, during Binza's History of Magic lectures, which barely qualified as consciousness anyway. He opened it now to the section on the Soul Constellation's full consolidation, to the part he'd read 3 times and was still processing. The text was in Latin, but he'd had Hermione's margin translation since that first night, and his Latin was getting better than anyone knew because he'd been quietly studying it since 3rd year. When the constellation completes its first cycle, the anchor and all 7 bound, present and acknowledged, the prima vis will manifest in physical form. Not a spell. Not a charm. A living current of the foundation magic, capable of things that have no names in any conventional system. The anchor will be the lens through which this passes. The 7 will be the prism. He read it again. And again. The anchor will be the lens. He thought about what Dumbledore had said in the office, that the bond made the anchor whole in ways the magic recognized were missing, which was different from what Hermione had read about power increasing. Not power added to a container. The container changing shape so that more could move through it. He thought about the war. About Voldemort, gaining strength in the shadows while the Ministry pointed the other direction. About Malachar in the vault, patient and old and telling inconveniently plausible partial truths through the stone. About the people the magic had gathered, Hermione who understood things before they happened, Luna who saw what others refused to look at, Fleur who read truth and moved like something that couldn't be intimidated, Daphne with her calculated survival and her protected sister and her family standing in exactly the wrong place, Tonks who was change made physical, Susan Bones with her grief building pressure towards something that would be devastating when it broke. He thought about what they could be if they stopped moving separately. He put the book in his bag, stood up, and went to find Tonks. She was on her security sweep, which meant she was moving through the corridors in a rotation Harry had memorized within the first week because knowing where the order was in the building was basic situational awareness and he'd decided months ago to stop apologizing for thinking tactically. He caught up with her on the 6th floor. I need to talk to you properly, he said. Not about the bond. About Malachar. Tonks fell into step with him without breaking stride. Dumbledore briefed me an hour ago. I know about the vault. Her hair was a serious dark red tonight, the color she went when she was in actual work mode. I also know about Sirius, and I'm choosing not to be angry about that yet because I don't have the bandwidth. I know. I made the same choice. He paused. I need an Auror's read on Malachar. Not a historian's, not a magical theorist's. What do you make of him from what you know? Tonks was quiet for a few steps. Honestly? He scares me more than Voldemort. Why? Because Voldemort is understandable, she said. He's broken in ways you can map. His fear of death, his need to dominate, there's a logic to it, even if the logic is terrible. Malakar's been in a box for 400 years, and when he finally gets to talk to someone, he leads with a partial truth. She glanced at Harry. That's not desperation. That's strategy. He's playing a long game with someone he just met, which means he's been planning this conversation for longer than any of us have been alive. A beat. That's the kind of intelligence that doesn't make mistakes. So we assume everything he says is true enough to be believed and false enough to be a trap, Harry said. I'd assume that, yeah. And we figure out his actual endgame before he gets to execute it. Tonks looked at him sideways. When you say we, I mean us. The Constellation. The people who can actually feel what the bond is doing, which means we have a sensitivity to its misuse that nobody else in this building has. He looked at her directly. I know you're an Auror and I know your professional instinct is to escalate this to the Order. I'm not asking you to go against that. I'm asking you to also keep a channel open here. Tonks was quiet for a moment, and then she stopped walking. Harry stopped too. You're 15, she said, but this time it didn't have the distress it had carried before. It was more like admiration fighting with worry, with admiration currently winning. Almost 16, he said. Harry. I know, he said. But you know I'm right. She looked at him for a long moment in the torchlight. Her hair shifted through the dark red into something that was almost gold. Yeah, she said. You're right. She started walking again. Keep me looped. Everything you learn about the vault, I want to know in real time, not after. Deal. And eat something, she said. You look like you've been skipping meals again. I haven't, you've got that gaunt look about the eyes. Eat. A constellation doesn't work if its anchor collapses from protein deficiency. Harry opened his mouth and couldn't immediately find a response to that. Good night, Harry, Tonks said, turning down the east corridor. Good night, he said, and he was smiling in a way he hadn't noticed until it was already there. It was Hermione who found the anomaly. She came to him Thursday morning looking like she'd slept approximately none and had powered through on the academic equivalent of fury and strong tea. She sat across from him at breakfast, moved his plate 3 inches to the left to make room for the text she opened between them, and pointed at a passage. Read that, she said. He read it. She'd translated the relevant section into English in the margin, her handwriting smaller than usual, the letters compressed by the speed she'd been writing. The constellation, once marked, generates a sympathetic resonance in any sealed magic of sufficient age. This resonance is not harmful to the constellation members but may be harmful to whatever the sealed magic is containing, as the frequency of the prima vis is antithetical to corrupted anchor states. He looked up. The bond, Hermione said, leaning forward, doesn't just give Malakar access to the power of the constellation. It also threatens him. She tapped the passage. If the prima vis is antithetical to whatever he did to make himself immortal, if the constellation consolidating fully would actually be dangerous to him, then him wanting access to it isn't just about gaining power. It's about neutralizing a threat. A threat he's known was coming since he was sealed. She sat back. He needs the power of the bond because if he doesn't have it, the fully consolidated bond could destroy what's keeping him alive. The Great Hall moved around them, oblivious. Toast, orange juice, Thursday morning conversations about homework and Quidditch. Harry stared at the passage. He's not just hunting it because it makes him stronger, he said slowly. He's hunting it because it's the only thing that can kill him. I think so, Hermione said. I think that's why they sealed him instead of killing him, not because they couldn't kill him, but because the seal was actually more effective than death. Killing him would have removed the threat. The seal just delayed it. But a fully consolidated Soul Constellation would end it permanently. Which means, Harry said, that all we have to do to neutralize him is consolidate the bond. Which he will do everything in his power to stop, Hermione said. Or subvert. Or redirect. She paused. He's not just an ancient threat. He's the reason the bond needs to happen, and he knows it, and he's had 400 years to plan for it. She looked at Harry very steadily. So, what do we do? Harry thought about the vault. The seventh lock pulsing. The voice in the stone saying go away, come back when you've thought about it. Malachar had been patient for 4 centuries. Harry had been patient for 15 years. He picked up his fork. We consolidate the bond, he said. Deliberately and on our own terms. Not because a vault thing decided the timing. Because we choose it. He took a bite of his breakfast. And we start tonight. Hermione blinked. Then, slowly, she closed the text and pushed it aside and picked up her own fork. I'll set up the room, she said. I know you will. She looked at him, and there was something in her face that was past the research and past the processing and into the thing she hadn't had words for in the room of requirement 5 days ago. It wasn't resolved, it didn't need to be yet. But it was there, and it was real, and they were both done pretending it wasn't. Okay, she said. Tonight, then. Below them, deep in the stone, Malachar felt the shift in the bond's frequency, the decision in it, the gathering intent, and the patience he had carried for 4 centuries contracted into something sharper, more immediate. He began, very carefully, to plan. Chapter 4, The Fire and the Ice. The room of requirement was different that night. Harry had asked it for a space where the 7 of them could work together, and the room had taken that request seriously in a way that felt almost personal, like it understood the difference between a training room and a gathering space. The ceiling was higher than usual, the walls warm stone rather than the sterile practice hall configuration. There were no mats, no dummies, no targets. Just the space itself, lit by wall sconces that burned a low amber, and a circular arrangement of seats near the center that none of them had to be directed toward. They came in 1s and 2s over the course of 10 minutes. Hermione first, naturally, with 2 books she put on the floor beside her chair and then appeared to decide she didn't need after all. Luna, who arrived wearing a necklace made of what appeared to be bottle corks and was holding a small glass vial of something luminescent that she placed carefully on the floor near her feet. Ginny, who came with Susan, both of them quiet in a way that had stopped being awkward and started being comfortable. Tonks slipped in through the side entrance she used for her patrol circuit, still in her aura gear, hair a muted gold tonight. Daphne came last, 5 minutes later than everyone else, precisely dressed, with the expression of someone who has been standing outside a door deciding whether to open it and has made a final, irrevocable decision. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Fleur. Fleur was seated with the particular composure of someone who has arranged herself to project containment and is fully aware she's doing it. She looked at Daphne with eyes that were assessing and direct. The temperature of the room dropped 2 degrees, metaphorically speaking. Harry had seen this coming. He'd have to have been wearing a blindfold not to. 2 women of precisely equal pride and exactly different everything else, both of whom had been managing difficult circumstances through iron self-possession for most of their lives, suddenly occupying the same small social space. He'd thought about intervening preemptively. He'd decided against it, because preemptive intervention in something like this tended to make it worse. He watched Daphne cross the room and sit in the remaining empty chair, which happened to be directly across the circle from Fleur. Greengrass, Fleur said, as a greeting. Delacour, Daphne said, as a reply. And that was it, for approximately 45 seconds, while everyone else in the room did the thing where you pay very close attention to something else. Then Fleur said, "You're the one from Slytherin." "You're the one from France," Daphne said. "I notice you say that as though it is a category equivalent to Slytherin. I notice you say Slytherin as though it's a category requiring acknowledgement." Ron, who was sitting outside the circle on a bench near the wall with Harry's permission because Harry had made the executive decision that the group needed a non-bonded presence with functioning social instincts, put his face in his hands. Harry leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. All right. 2 things. First, he looked at Fleur. Daphne grew up in a Death Eater adjacent household and has been navigating that at significant personal cost, which is information I'm sharing because this group doesn't operate on partial information. He looked at Daphne. And Fleur spent the Triwizard Tournament being systematically underestimated by everyone around her and performed spectacularly anyway, which is information you should have because it's relevant to how you read her. He paused. You're both the smartest people in any room you've been in for most of your lives. This room has 8 of you. Adjust accordingly. Fleur looked at Harry with an expression that was caught between being annoyed at being handled and being impressed by the handling. Daphne looked at Harry with the expression she'd been developing over the last week, the one that meant she was revising her estimate of him upward again. Fine, Daphne said. D'accord, Fleur said, which wasn't an agreement exactly but was close enough. Luna looked between them with benign interest. I think you'll get along eventually, she said. You're both very good at holding positions, and people who are good at holding positions respect each other once they understand the other one isn't going to move. Luna, Ron said from the wall, that's either very wise or completely useless. Usually both, Luna said pleasantly. Harry had thought about how to run this. Not the way he ran DA meetings, this wasn't a teaching session and he wasn't their professor. But there needed to be a shape to it, because 7 people sitting in a circle feeling the bond's warmth and waiting for something to happen wasn't a strategy. We know what the bond is now, he said. We know what Malachar wants with it. Hermione's research tells us that the full consolidation is what ends him, not as a byproduct of the bond, but as the central function it was formed to fulfill. Which means we have a direction. He paused. The consolidation doesn't happen by ritual or by choice in the conventional sense. The old texts all say it happens through shared extremity, real stakes, real crisis, the kind of thing the bond can feel and respond to. We can't manufacture that. But we can prepare for it, Hermione said. When it happens, and given the current situation, it will happen, we need to be functional as a unit. Not just as individuals. She looked around the circle. The bond connects our magical signatures at a foundational level. In theory, we should be able to operate cooperatively in ways that aren't normally possible between separate casters. In theory, Ginny said. Every theory was a practice that hadn't been tried yet, Luna said. I want to try something, Harry said. He looked at Tonks. You're a metamorphmagus. Last I checked, Tonks said. Your ability, it's involuntary when you're emotionally affected, but voluntary when you're controlled. You can change any feature at will. Can you feel the difference between those 2 states? The voluntary and the involuntary? Tonks considered this. The involuntary is faster. Less deliberate. Like breathing when you're not thinking about it versus breathing when you are. And the bond, Harry said. When you feel it right now, in this room, which one does it feel like? Tonks was quiet for a moment. Her hair shifted, not dramatically, just a slight warming of color, the pink deepening toward rose. Voluntary, she said slowly. Deliberate. Like someone's been leaving my door unlocked for a while and I've been locking it from the inside, and when I feel the bond one stop, she paused. I stop doing the extra lock. Harry nodded. That's what I want to work with. Not spell work tonight. This. He put his hand flat against his sternum. The bond is in here and it has a quality, a warmth, a direction, a frequency. I want to know if we can consciously communicate through it. Not words. Not images. Intentions. Hermione was already writing something down. Like nonverbal casting, but lateral instead of between mind and wand. Exactly like that. I've been doing it already, Luna said, in her pleasant, slightly to one side way. Not deliberately. But I've been feeling Harry's mood for the last 4 days. When he's frustrated, I know before I see him. This morning you were very clear for about an hour before breakfast. Harry looked at her. What was I? Decided, she said. And underneath that, something that felt like relief. Like someone who's been told the war they're fighting is actually winnable. The room was quiet. Harry held the truth of that, because it was true, exactly as she'd described it. Right, he said. So it's already happening. Let's see if we can make it intentional. What followed wasn't dramatic. That was the thing Harry noticed, and noticed the others noticing, the way real discovery almost never looked the way you expected it to. No light show. No explosion of power. 7 people sitting in a circle in a warm room trying to do something that had no established methodology, and gradually, over the course of 2 hours, figuring out that they could. It started with Hermione, which was appropriate. She had the most rigorous self-awareness of the group. She could locate and identify her own mental states with a precision that was honestly extraordinary, and when Harry asked them to simply try to project something outward through the bond, she chose certainty. The bone-deep intellectual certainty she felt when a solution aligned perfectly with all available evidence. Harry felt it arrive. Not as a thought. As a texture, a sharpness and a clarity like the air after rain. I got that, he said. Hermione's eyes went wide. Really? Felt like the moment when something clicks. Like finishing an equation. She actually smiled, which was not a small thing. Yes, she said. That's exactly it. Susan went next, because she'd been sitting with her hands very still on her knees and Harry could see she was ready. She closed her eyes. What she sent was not happy, it was grief, or something adjacent to grief, a weight and a depth and a warmth underneath both of those things. Harry received it as pressure in his chest, like standing at the edge of something very deep, and the warmth underneath it as the knowledge that you're not standing there alone. Susan, Ginny said quietly from across the circle, and she looked it rather than just saying it, reaching towards something that Susan felt and had been carrying alone. Susan opened her eyes. She looked across at Ginny. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with Harry and everything to do with 2 girls who'd been circling each other for 5 years and finally occupying the same real space. The grief is functional, isn't it? Ginny said. Not always, Susan said. But I'm making it that way. Daphne sent nothing when it came to her turn. She held the circle's attention for a moment and then said, with precise honesty, I don't know how to open that channel without losing control of what comes through it, and I'm not willing to do that yet. No one argued with her. Harry didn't. That's a fair position, he said. I'll need time, she said. You have it. The tiniest fraction of tension left her shoulders. Fleur, by contrast, projected without hesitation, and what she sent was fierce and bright and took Harry and half the room slightly by surprise. Not aggression. Not the performative fire people expected from a part Vila witch. Something cleaner and hotter than that. Purpose. An absolute, burning certainty of self that had nothing to ask permission and nothing to prove. It hit the room like opening a window. Daphne blinked. Looked at Fleur with something new in her expression, not friendliness yet, but genuine recalibration. Something was being revised. Fleur looked back, steadily. Luna put her hand up. I'd like to try something slightly different, she said. She looked at Harry. May I? Go ahead. She took the small glass vial from beside her chair and uncorked it. The luminescent liquid inside gave off a very faint blue-white light. She looked at it thoughtfully, and then she looked at Harry through the vial, the way you look at the sun through colored glass. The thing about the bond, Luna said, is that it's not new. It's not new for any of us. The magic recognized it because it was already there, it's always been there, in the connections between us, in the things we'd each already felt and set aside. She looked at Harry directly, through the vial and without it. You knew what you were looking for before you knew to look for it. In each of us. That's why it worked the night of the Patronus. The magic didn't build something new. It named something that already existed. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when something true has been said in them. Harry looked at each of them in turn. Hermione, who had been at his side since he was 11 years old and had, apparently, been the first thread named. Luna, who had seen him clearly from the beginning without ever needing him to explain himself. Ginny, bright and fierce and holy herself in a way that had always made the space around her feel more real. Susan, whose grief was becoming something directed and powerful that the war was going to feel. Tonks, who changed shape on the outside as easily as Harry changed his approach on the inside, both of them built for adaptation in ways that couldn't be taught. Daphne, who had survived years of deliberate concealment and had walked into a room she wasn't invited to because the magic had made her direction clear and she was done ignoring directions. Fleur, who had crossed the channel on no notice because purpose always answered its own call. Right, Harry said. We train together from now on. Not separate, together, as a unit. The Patronus group expands to include all of you. Daphne. He looked at her. You're not officially in the DA. Officially you aren't here. That's manageable. But in this room you are, and the protection that comes with the DA's silence includes you. He looked at Fleur. You're staying. Obviously, Fleur said. Tonks, he looked at her. I'll arrange cover with Dumbledore, she said. Extended security assignment. It's not technically untrue. Good. He stood. The threat from Malachar is not theoretical. He's going to try to interfere with this before it consolidates, and his approach is going to be subtle because he's been doing subtle for 400 years and he is apparently very good at it. He looked around the circle. He's going to try to get into our heads. Dreams, reflective surfaces, ambient suggestion through the bond itself. If you feel anything that doesn't feel like it came from this room, tell me. Immediately. Hermione raised her hand. What about Voldemort? He uses the connection between your scar and his own magic. Occlumency is supposed to be the answer, but I've been working on it, Harry said. He'd been working on it alone because Snape's version of teaching had been systematically counterproductive, but he'd been finding his way to it through a different route. Not the cold blank wall Snape described, but something more like the decision about his own emotional states that Luna had helped him identify. The choice about what the connection found when it looked. I'll talk you through what I've been doing. It's not what Snape taught. It very rarely is, Hermione said, with feeling. The session broke up around 11. People filtered out in pairs, and the room was almost empty before Fleur and Daphne were both still present, which Harry noticed from the doorway where he'd stopped to check in with Tonks. I'll be 5 minutes, he told Tonks. She glanced into the room. Clocked the situation with aura efficiency. I'll wait outside, she said. Harry went back in. Fleur and Daphne were not fighting. They were standing approximately 6 feet apart near the far wall, engaged in what appeared to be a very controlled, very precise conversation in which neither of them was giving any ground but both of them were paying genuine attention. He caught the end of it. I am not saying it is not difficult, Fleur was saying. I am saying that the difficulty does not change the reality, and functioning from the reality is more useful than functioning from the difficulty. That's very clean when you say it, Daphne said. It's less clean when the reality includes a father whose choices could get everyone in this room put on a target list. My grandmother was sealed in a preserve for 3 years during Grindelwald's occupation of France, Fleur said, level and direct. Because Vila were classified as non-human by the collaborationist government, and non-humans had no rights, and there was nothing any of us could do about it from outside. She survived it. A pause. Family complications in the context of dark wizards are something I understand. Daphne looked at her for a long moment. Then, how did she survive it? She made herself extraordinarily useful, Fleur said, and she waited for the right moment, and when it came she moved very quickly. She met Daphne's eyes. That is what we do. We wait, and we move quickly, and we don't let the people who want us contained define how much space we take up in the meantime. Something shifted in Daphne's expression, a movement behind the composure, like a light changing behind frosted glass. I'm not easy to be around, she said. I've been told. I am also not easy to be around, Fleur said. I have been told much more loudly. Almost a smile. I think we will find this more manageable than expected. Harry backed out before they saw him. Tonks was in the corridor, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Well, she said. I think they're going to be fine, he said. You sound surprised. I was hoping, not sure. He fell into step with her down the corridor. How are you doing? Really? She was quiet for a moment. Not deflecting, genuinely taking the question seriously. I'm doing something that feels like falling, she said finally. Not the bad kind. The kind where you've stepped off something and the ground hasn't arrived yet, but you're fairly sure there's ground somewhere. She paused. Is that a normal thing to be feeling? I think so, Harry said. I've been feeling it too. She looked at him sideways. The age thing isn't going to sort itself out immediately. I know. But it does sort itself out eventually, she said, and it wasn't a question but it had the shape of one, and Harry understood that what she was actually saying was tell me this is real enough to be worth it. Yeah, he said. It does. He meant it. She nodded once, to herself, and her hair shifted back toward the bright pink she wore when she was most herself. Good, she said. Right. Security sweep. Go to bed, you've got classes tomorrow. The possessed student was in the library. Harry found out about it at 7 in the morning when Neville came to his dormitory door with the expression of someone who has received information they've been sitting with for several minutes trying to decide how to deliver it. Marcus Belby, Neville said. 6th year Ravenclaw. Madame Pants found him in the library at 6 this morning trying to get into the restricted section. When she challenged him, Neville paused. She said he looked at her with eyes that weren't his eyes and told her to go away in a voice that wasn't his voice, and then he sat down at a table and opened a book and seemed to forget she existed. Harry was already putting on his robes. Is he still there? As of 10 minutes ago. Harry got to the library in under 3 minutes, which was fast enough that he arrived before most of the school was properly awake. Hermione was already there. She'd apparently received her own version of the alert through channels Harry suspected were connected to Madame Pance's personal friendship network, and she was standing near the door looking at Marcus Belby with the expression she reserved for things that required extremely careful handling. Belby was at a table near the restricted section barrier. He was a tall boy, lanky, with the slightly unfocused quality of a Ravenclaw who spent a lot of time in his own head. Currently he was reading, or performing the motion of reading, with a stillness that was too complete. People fidgeted. People shifted in their seats. Marcus Belby was not moving at all. Harry walked up to the table and sat down across from him. Belby didn't look up. Good morning, Harry said. Nothing. Harry leaned forward. I know you're in there, he said, not to Belby but to whatever was occupying Belby. So let's skip the performance. The stillness broke. Belby looked up. His eyes were wrong, not dramatically, not the Hollywood version of possession, but subtly wrong. The focus was too deep and too old. The expression in them belonged to a face that had seen centuries and was currently dealing with minor inconvenience. Potter. The voice came from Belby's mouth in Belby's register but with a different quality underneath it, the same stone resonance Harry had heard in the vault. Faster than I expected. I thought you'd have at least one more cup of tea. Let him go, Harry said. He's quite all right. I'm not damaging him. I needed access to the library and the living tend to be useful for that. What were you looking for? Belby's face arranged itself into something that was almost amusement. Confirmation of something I already knew. You've worked out the consolidation, haven't you? The mechanism. The girl who reads everything, Hermione, is not a topic, Harry said. She found the key, didn't she? That a consolidated constellation is antithetical to my continued existence. A pause. I want you to understand something, Harry Potter. I have been sealed in a stone box for 4 centuries. I have been patient. I have been careful. I have been many things that I would not naturally be. And I am telling you, man to man, that what I want is not what you've been told I want. You want to live, Harry said. I want to stop dying very slowly, Malachar said, and for the first time the voice had something raw in it. Being sealed is not the same as being safe. The inner seals are eroding. Not because of your Patronus, that only accelerated it. They've been eroding for a century. When they go, I go. Everything that I am, everything I've learned in 900 years of living, gone into nothing. Belby's eyes held Harry's. And the people sealed with me, they die when I die. 4 people who have been in that vault for 400 years. That's not something I can verify, Harry said, exactly as he'd said it to the stone. And even if it's true, it is true, Hermione said from behind him. Her voice was careful and steady and slightly unhappy about what it was saying. I checked this morning after, I found a secondary source that confirms it. The vault seal anchors his contained consciousness and the others along with it. If the seals fail before a controlled release, then we need a controlled release, Harry said. He looked at Belby's face, at Malachar behind it. You're not getting the bond's power. That's not a negotiating position, it's a fact. But if there's a way to address the seals that doesn't involve you accessing the constellation, I'm willing to look at it. You'd help me? I'd look at the problem, Harry said. Which is different. He held the 2 old eyes. But you're going to get out of that student right now, and you're going to stop using people as vehicles, and if I find out you've touched anyone in this school again, I am going to make you understand very clearly why the magic chose me as the anchor of this particular constellation. The silence that followed had the quality of something recalibrating. You're not afraid of me at all, are you? Malachar said. I've met Voldemort in person, Harry said. Twice. I'm not easily impressed. Something in Belby's face changed, the deep focus shifting, the 2 old lights stepping back. Belby blinked. Looked around. Put his hand to his head. What? He said, in his actual voice. Library, Harry said. You were studying. Go get some breakfast. He pushed his chair back and stood. You were about to check out a restricted title but you decided you didn't need it. Belby looked down at the book in front of him, bewildered. He stood up, collected himself with the dignity of someone who was not entirely sure what had just happened but was committed to acting like they were, and left. Harry looked at the space above the table. Nothing. Malachar was gone. The room was just a library again, dusty and old and full of books and morning light. Hermione came to stand beside him. He wasn't lying, she said quietly. About the seals. I spent 2 hours last night confirming the secondary sources. I know he wasn't, Harry said. Which makes this more complicated. Everything's more complicated than it looks, Harry said. That's been my experience. He picked up the book Belby had been reading and looked at the cover. Ancient Magical Containment, Theory and Practice, 1489 edition. He handed it to Hermione. Check that out properly and read it, he said. I want to know everything about how those seals work before Malachar decides to skip the conversation and move directly to the next thing. Hermione took the book with both hands like she was receiving something important, which she was. Harry. He looked at her. You handled that well, she said. I handled it the only way I know how. That's why it was well, she said simply. He went to the room of requirement alone that afternoon and stood in the center of it and said, without quite knowing what he was doing, I need to understand what I am. The room gave him a mirror. Not the mirror of Ariste, this was plain, unenchanted, or as unenchanted as anything in Hogwarts could really be. He stood in front of it and looked at himself and thought about what Malachi had asked in Belby's voice. You're not afraid of me at all, are you? The honest answer was that he didn't have the time for it. Not bravado. Not performance. Just a genuine absence of the paralysis that fear could bring, because he'd made a choice, somewhere between the vault and the library and the circle of 7 people sitting together figuring out how to use a connection that had always existed, to stop waiting for someone to tell him what he was capable of and just be it. He thought about the old book. The anchor will be the lens through which the prima vis passes. He raised his wand. Not at the mirror, he wasn't that theatrical. Just raised it and felt the magic in him, the way he usually didn't allow himself to feel it because feeling it too clearly had always seemed dangerous. The way it sat in him, dense and warm and considerably larger than it had any conventional right to be for a 15-year-old student. The room's ambient light brightened slightly. He hadn't done anything. He'd just let himself be aware of it. Let the magic know it had his attention. Hello, he thought, which was a strange thing to think at your own magical core, but the warmth that answered didn't feel strange at all. He thought about the constellation. Felt the distributed warmth of it, each thread, each person, each point of contact between his magical signature and theirs. Hermione's sharpness. Luna's clarity. Ginny's brightness. Susan's depth. Tonks's fluid aliveness. Daphne's cool, precise attention. Fleur's purposeful fire. He breathed out slowly. Somewhere below him, 60 feet through stone and history, Malachi was in his vault thinking about controlled releases and the boy who wasn't afraid of him. Somewhere in the castle, Voldemort's darkness pressed at the edges of Harry's scar, looking for purchase and not finding it, because the warmth of the bond was occupying the space that fear usually made available. And in the room of requirement, lit by amber sconces and the patient magic of a school that had been built to keep its students safe and had decided that this particular student mattered, Harry Potter stood in front of an ordinary mirror and looked at himself and felt, for the first time, like what he saw was the whole thing. Not the chosen one. Not the boy who lived. Not the orphan or the burden or the secret keeper of a war that hadn't technically started yet. Just Harry. And Harry, it turned out, was more than enough. Chapter 5, What the Sight Sees. Luna came to Harry on a Friday morning before the castle had properly woken up. She knocked on the Gryffindor common room portrait at 6:30, which Harry knew because he'd been awake since 5. The scar had been dull and insistent all night, not painful but present in the way it got when Voldemort was emotionally activated about something. He'd lain in the dark running a clemency in the way he developed, not the blank wall but the deliberate choice about what the connection found when it reached for him, and eventually the pressure had eased, and eventually he'd given up on sleep and dressed in the dark. He was already at the portrait when the knock came. Luna was in her school robes with a large bag over one shoulder and her hair loose. She had no spectrospecs, no radish earrings, none of the usual Luna accessories. She looked more streamlined than he'd ever seen her, like she'd made a decision about what she needed and stripped everything else away. "You're already up," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "You?" "I don't sleep well when things need doing," she said, which was the most direct and un-Luna-like thing she'd ever said, except it was also completely Luna because she said it without any drama at all. "We need to go to the Forbidden Forest." Harry looked at the bag. "You packed?" "I packed yesterday," she said. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." "How did you know I wasn't ready yesterday?" "You were still processing the library incident," she said. "You needed a day to settle what you learned about Malachi and what it means for the approach. You're settled now. I could feel it this morning when I woke up. The bond. It was doing that more clearly now, the ambient awareness of each other's states moving through it like low music. He was getting used to it. "What's in the forest that you can't find in the library?" "A Fey Walker," she said. "They're mentioned in my father's research under 17 different names in 8 different traditions. They're the oldest intelligent species in Britain. They predate humans, they predate wizards, and they were here when Malachar was sealed." She held his gaze. "They remember it, Harry. Firsthand." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped out of the portrait hole. "Let me get my cloak." They took the invisibility cloak between them, which was a slightly awkward arrangement that mostly worked if they walked close together and didn't make any sudden turns. Luna seemed entirely untroubled by the proximity, moving with the same unbothered ease she brought to everything. They made it out the front doors and across the grounds while the sky was still the pale grey pink of early morning, the dew on the grass cold through Harry's shoes. At the forest's edge, Harry pulled the cloak off and folded it into his bag. Under the trees it was dark enough that the cloak was more hindrance than help, and whatever Luna was looking for either couldn't be sneaked up on or didn't need to be. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Where it wants us," Luna said, already moving between the trees. Harry followed. The forest had its own kind of morning, the ordinary world's dawn reduced to suggestions here, filtered through canopy so dense in places that the light came through in narrow columns, dusty and specific. Things moved at the periphery, none of them threatening in an immediate sense, most of them simply old and unhurried and conducting their business without reference to the 2 humans moving through. 15 minutes in, the trees opened into a glade Harry had never seen before. He'd been in the Forbidden Forest more times than he strictly should have been over 5 years, and the fact that he'd never found this particular clearing suggested either that it moved, or that it only appeared for specific visitors, or both. It was small, perhaps 30 feet across, with a single ancient oak at its center that was so large its bark had folded in on itself in the way of very old trees, wrinkles layering on wrinkles, the whole thing dignified with age in a way that made Dumbledore look recent. At the base of the oak, something was sitting. Harry's first thought was that it was a person. Then it moved slightly and the proportions shifted, the light catching it differently, and he revised. It was like a person in the way that a very old river is like water. The essential substance was there but the form had been doing something different with it for long enough that similarity was the surface and the difference went all the way down. The Fey Walker was small, seated, it came to perhaps Harry's shoulder. Its skin had the color and texture of old bark, and its eyes, when it turned them toward the 2 of them, were the color of deep water, dark and unhurried and full of things that had no time pressures. Luna crouched down. Not submissively, just to be at eye level. "Thank you for letting us find you," she said, with the tone she used for things she genuinely respected. The Fey Walker looked at her for a long moment, and then it looked at Harry, and something moved through its expression, not recognition exactly. More like confirmation. Like seeing something it had expected and been patient about. It spoke in a language Harry didn't recognize. Luna listened. She listened for a while, and Harry stood there and let the forest be quiet around him and felt the bond's warmth steady in his chest and waited. Then Luna looked up at him. "It remembers the ceiling," she said. "It was there. It says the council came to this forest to ask for the tree's endorsement because the sealing required the cooperation of the land itself." She paused. "The tree is still part of the seal, Harry. The Fey Walker's oak. That's why the seal has been eroding, it's a living system, and living systems change." "What does it say about Malachar?" Luna spoke to the Fey Walker again. The response was longer. She translated in pieces as it came. "He says Malachar was not a simple villain. He says the word villain is a convenience that small minds use for complex situations." She paused. "He says Malachar was a man who loved too much and understood too little about the cost of that, and who let his fear of losing what he loved become the most dangerous thing about him." She looked at Harry. "He says that sounds familiar." Harry held the Fey Walker's deep water eyes. "Does he think Malachar can be trusted?" Through Luna, he says trust is the wrong question. The right question is whether Malachar has had enough time alone with himself to understand what he was. A pause. He says 400 years is usually enough time. Usually. Luna spoke again. The Feywalker's response was brief and accompanied by a gesture, one small, bark-textured hand placed flat against the oak's roots. He says the tree is willing to cooperate with a resealing, Luna translated. A proper one, this time, with the full constellation's involvement. Not a containment, a resolution. She looked at Harry with her wide, silver eyes. He says the people inside the vault deserve better than to spend another 4 centuries in stone. Harry looked at the ancient tree. The roots spread in every direction he could see and probably in several he couldn't. 900 years of forest. A seal that was a living system, eroding because living systems did. 4 people sealed inside along with a consciousness that had spent 400 years alone with its own worst decisions. Tell him we're listening, Harry said. They were in the forest for 2 hours. By the time they came out, Harry had the shape of something, not a complete plan, not yet, but the structural bones of one, the kind that felt right in the same bone-deep way that good magic felt right. The kind that when you held it up to the problem it fit all the edges. Hermione was waiting for them at the castle doors. She had the look she got when she'd been awake since before them and had done significant research and was slightly frustrated that the research had led somewhere that complicated rather than simplified things. Harry had learned to read this expression in year 1. It was the expression of Hermione arriving at a conclusion she wasn't comfortable with. I found the secondary containment record, she said, before they were fully through the door. The one from the original council. Luna, she looked at Luna. Were you right about the tree? Yes, Luna said. Hermione exhaled. Right. Then the resealing, or the resolution, depending on how we approach it, requires all 7 of us, a synchronized casting, and probably something from the vault itself. She looked at Harry. There's a piece of the original seal magic that's kept inside, a crystallized fragment of the prima vis from 900 years ago. The council used it as an anchor for the containment. A pause. We need it for the resolution. We need to get inside the vault, Harry said. Or open it enough to retrieve the fragment, Hermione said. Which is not the same as fully opening it. Theoretically. If the 7th lock is what it appears to be. Malachar said the 7th lock was a key, Harry said. Hermione looked uncomfortable. I know. I believe him. She said this as though it cost her something. The fragment will be near the 7th lock, that's where they'd have stored it. And Malachar knows that. He's known this whole time that we'd eventually come to the vault to get it. She met Harry's eyes. He's been steering us there. I know, Harry said. Hermione blinked. You know. I've known since the library. He's been pointing us at the vault from the beginning, giving us just enough truth to make us feel like we're discovering the solution ourselves. Harry moved into the entrance hall and started up the stairs, and they fell in on either side of him. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter. How does it not matter that we're being manipulated? Because what he's steering us toward is actually the right answer, Harry said. He wants the resolution. He wants out of the vault, properly, in a way that doesn't kill him and doesn't kill the people sealed with him. He's been trying to engineer that since we arrived on the scene because we're the first constellation he's been able to work with. He looked at Hermione. His steering and our actual best option are the same thing. He's not lying about the goal. He's just not entirely honest about the route. That's a very thin margin for trust, Hermione said. I'm not trusting him, Harry said. I'm using the same information he is and arriving at the same destination from a direction I control. He paused on a landing. Set up the room tonight. All 7 of us. I need to tell everyone at once. The afternoon was a lesson in things happening without regard for timing. Harry was in transfiguration when his scar flared, Not the dull background ache of the morning but a sharp, specific pulse. He'd been developing the ability to distinguish Voldemort's different emotional states through the connection, and this one was anger. Cold, directed anger, the kind that preceded specific action. He didn't reach for it. He let the occlumency do what it did, not shutting the connection, which never worked, but controlling what it found on his end. A door that opened onto nothing threatening. After class, he found Ron in the corridor. "Something's happened," Harry said quietly. Ron read his face. "Voldemort. He's angry about something specific. I don't know what yet." He paused. "Keep your ear to the ground. If anything comes through order channels, I'll find you." Ron fell into step with him. "How are we doing?" "On everything. The full everything." Harry thought about it. "Better than we should be, probably." Ron nodded slowly. "The stuff with the bond. The 7 of you. I want you to know that I'm," he stopped. Started again. "I don't feel left out. That's not what this is. I want you to know that I'm glad for it. Whatever it does for you. You've needed," he stopped again. "I know," Harry said. "Ground," Ron said. "You've needed ground." Harry looked at his best friend, this person who'd stood beside him through things no one should have to stand beside anyone through, who was here again, who would always be here again. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks, Ron." "Don't be weird about it," Ron said. "Right. Dinner?" The message came through Tonks at 5:30. She caught Harry outside the Great Hall, and the expression on her face told him before she said a word that the thing his scar had been warning him about all afternoon had arrived. "Amelia Bones," Tonks said, keeping her voice low. "She's all right, she survived. But they hit her office. Direct attack, 4 Death Eaters, mid-afternoon. She fought them off herself but," she paused. "Susan needs to know before she hears it from someone else." Harry was already turning toward the Hufflepuff table. Susan was sitting with Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott, laughing at something Ernie had said with the open, unguarded quality she had with people she trusted. Harry came to her table and crouched beside her chair, which put them at eye level, because this was not a standing-over conversation. She looked at him and the laughter left her face. "Your aunt," he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. "She's all right. She's safe. But there was an attack on her office today and I wanted you to hear it from me." Susan's hands went flat on the table. Her face went through several things in rapid succession, fear and relief and grief and something that wasn't grief but lived in the same neighborhood. "She's safe," she said. "She is. Fought them off herself, apparently." He paused. "She's extraordinary, your aunt." Susan's jaw was tight. "I know she is." She looked at her hands on the table. "This is going to keep happening," she said. "Not a question. He's going to keep targeting people who oppose him until there aren't any left." "Not if we stop him first," Harry said. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry and her expression was the one he was coming to know as Susan's particular version of determination, not showy, not hot, but absolute in the way of deep cold water. The grief she'd been carrying and building pressure around had found a direction. "Tonight," she said. "The room. I'll be there." She paused. "Tell me we're doing something that matters." "We're doing the thing that ends it," Harry said. "That's what tonight is." She held his gaze for a moment, and then she nodded. "Okay." She picked up her fork. "Then I need to eat something first." They were all in the room by 8. The same amber light, the same circle, but different tonight. The air in the room had a density that hadn't been there before, a weight of intention. Something about everyone's posture was slightly changed, slightly more present. The week of working together, of sending intentions through the bond, of surviving Malakar's library visit and the vault and the morning in the forest, it had done something. The group had a cohesion now that was past the early stage of figuring out if they could work together. They knew they could. Now they were deciding what to do with that. Harry told them everything. The Fey Walker. The tree as part of the seal. The crystallized fragment of the prima vis inside the vault. The resealing, the resolution, and what it required. He watched their faces as he talked. Hermione cross-referencing what he was saying against what she'd read, her expression moving through confirmation and concern and acceptance. Luna listening with the quality of someone hearing a tune they've been humming without knowing where it came from. Ginny with her eyes sharp and her hands still. Susan with the new directed quality she'd arrived with. Daphne absorbing every detail with the precision of someone building a tactical map. Tonks with her Auror's instinct for operational shape, already thinking about practical requirements. Fleur was looking at him with an expression he was starting to know as her specific version of attention, not just listening but receiving, the truth reading operating alongside the words. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. The fragment retrieval, Daphne said. We'll need to partially open the vault. 7th lock only, Harry said. Enough to reach through. And Malachar, Daphne said. He'll be right there when we do. Yes. And you trust that he won't try to use that moment. I trust that he knows it's his only real opportunity for a resolution that doesn't destroy him, Harry said. Self-interest is the most reliable kind of predictable. He held her gaze. And I trust that if he moves wrong, the 7 of us together can handle what a single consciousness in a vault can throw at us. Daphne considered this. Yes, she said, after a moment. I think we can. The synchronization, Hermione said. For the resolution casting. We've been practicing projecting through the bond, but this requires more than intention sharing. It requires synchronized spell work. We need to be operating as one caster, essentially. Show us what you mean, Harry said. Hermione stood up. She moved to the center of the circle and turned to face him. The bond already harmonizes our signatures at the foundational level, she said. What I think we can do is use that harmonic as a conducting frequency, like a key signature that all 7 of us play in. If you set the frequency, she looked at Harry, as the anchor, and we each attune to it, the casting should synchronize automatically. How do I set the frequency? Harry asked. By being completely yourself, Luna said, from her chair. Everyone looked at her. Not metaphorically, she said. The bond's frequency is Harry's authentic magical signature, the one underneath the choices he makes about how much of himself to use. When he's fully present without filtering, the bond resonates most clearly. That's what the Patronus did on the night of the first meeting. It was the most unguarded piece of magic he'd cast in years. The magic heard it and responded. She looked at Harry. Stop managing your own power, and the rest of us will attune to it naturally. Harry looked at Hermione. She was nodding slowly, the expression of someone who wished they'd put it that way first. Try it, Ginny said. Harry stood. He moved to the center of the circle, opposite Hermione. He thought about what he'd felt in the room of requirement alone, the moment of letting himself feel his own magic without qualification. He did it again, deliberately this time. Let it come forward without the usual management. The room changed. Not dramatically, not explosively. But the ambient light shifted, warmed, brightened at a quality that had nothing to do with the wall sconces. The air had a charge to it, the kind that was before rather than after. Harry could feel the bond's threads moving between him and each of the 7 in the room, feel them vibrate with the frequency he was generating, feel them attune one by one. Hermione's eyes went wide. I can feel it, she said. I can feel exactly where you are in the. She stopped. It's like a tuning fork. I know exactly what note to match. Me too, Ginny said. And me, Susan said. Tonks was looking at her own hand like she was seeing something in it. My metamorphmagus ability, she said, half to herself. It's responding. I can feel the frequency, it's like my own shifting, but external. Like a mirror of my own process. She looked up at Harry. I could use this. In combat, in transformation. If I attune to you I could shift faster, more accurately, in response to something happening to you without thinking about it. That's exactly what the text described, Hermione said, reaching for the book on the floor beside her chair. The prism effect. Each of the 7 amplifies and extends one of their natural capabilities through the anchor's frequency. Not a generic power boost, specific to what each person already does best. What does that mean for you specifically? Harry asked her. Knowing, she said immediately. Then she stopped, like the word had surprised her. When I'm attuned to you right now, I can feel the shape of the problem more completely than I can through pure research. Not the details, I still need the details from books. But the shape of it. The structure. Like seeing a blueprint from above instead of reading individual specifications. She looked at him with something that was odd and slightly undone. It's how you think, isn't it? Yeah, he said. You've been doing this the whole time, she said, more to herself than him. Seeing the shape of things and trusting it. And being wrong sometimes, he said. Don't romanticize the method. She almost smiled. No. Obviously. Luna, Harry said. What does the frequency do for you? Luna was quiet for a moment, her eyes slightly unfocused in the way that meant she was looking at something the others couldn't. I can see further, she said. Not geographically. Temporally. She blinked, refocused. I can see the vault, Harry. Right now. It looks, she paused. The 7th lock has a light in it that I can only see when I'm attuned. It's been waiting. It's been ready to be found for a very long time. What about the people inside? Harry asked. Luna was quiet for longer this time. Her expression moved through several things, soft and complicated. They're there, she said. I can feel them. Not individuals, a group signature, for people sealed together for 400 years. There, she paused, not suffering. Not anymore. But they're not living either. They're in a space that's between, and the space has been getting smaller. She came back fully into the room. We need to do this soon. Harry looked around the circle. Can everyone feel the frequency clearly? Assent from all 6. Good. He let himself feel the full weight of it, the constellation arrayed around him, each thread distinct, each person vivid and real and specific, the whole thing more than its parts. Tomorrow night, he said. We go to the vault. Should we tell Dumbledore? Hermione asked. After, Harry said. Hermione's expression did the thing where she was deciding whether to argue. She looked at him and apparently decided that the bone-deep surety in his voice was its own kind of evidence. After, she agreed. The crisis came at 11 o'clock. Harry was on his way back from the room of requirement when the bond lit up, all 6 threads simultaneously, with a quality he'd never felt before. Not the warm ambient pulse. Something sharp and urgent and coming from a specific direction. Outside. He was running before he'd consciously decided to run. He came through the front doors onto the grounds and stopped. There were 3 figures in aura robes at the edge of the forbidden forest, and they were not auras, not the way they were moving, not the specific wrongness of 3 people whose body language said controlled and whose magical signature said something else entirely. Tonks was between them and the castle, her wand out, her hair gone white in the way it went when she was at absolute maximum operational focus. She was outnumbered and she was holding. Harry came off the steps at a full run and had his wand up before he reached the halfway point across the grounds. He didn't announce himself. He didn't give anyone a warning shot. The first fake Auror turned toward him and raised a wand, and Harry hit him with a reductor so precisely calibrated that it shattered the wand without touching the hand, which was a level of precision that shouldn't have been possible at this speed and distance and had been possible for Harry since second year if he stopped apologizing for it. The second one fired something dark and heavy that Harry sidestepped without slowing down, angled his wand and returned something that was technically a variant of Expelliarmus but at a magnitude that sent the witch backward 12 feet into the treeline. The third one started to speak a word that Harry recognized as the beginning of an unforgivable and never got to finish it, because from behind him came the crack of apparition and Tonks moved between Harry and the spell with a shield charm that held, and then Harry came around her left side and hit the third figure with a spell that knocked her off her feet and left her thoroughly disarmed and face down on the ground. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Tonks was breathing hard. She looked at Harry. "You good?" Harry asked. "Define good." She lowered her wand. Looked at the 3 figures. Death Eaters. Low-level reconnaissance. They were mapping the castle's external wards. I caught them 20 minutes ago and was watching them work. Her jaw was tight. I didn't call for backup because I thought I had it handled until they realized I'd made them and the 3 of them decided to stop pretending. "You did have it handled," Harry said. He looked at the 3 figures on the ground. "Mostly. I had 2 of them," she said, with professional honesty. "The third would have been a problem." "They sent 3 because they know you're on the perimeter," Harry said. "Which means they know the Order has someone here." He scanned the treeline. Nothing else moving. It's not random reconnaissance. They're mapping for something specific. For what? Harry looked back at the castle, up at the pale windows, down at the ground beneath his feet. Down, 60 feet down through foundation stone to a vault that a 900-year-old sealed consciousness had been using to think about access and approaches for 4 centuries. "For the vault," he said. Tonks stared at him. "They know about it?" "I don't know how much they know. But if Voldemort's been looking for weapons against me and there's a sealed source of pre-wand magic 60 feet under Hogwarts that he can feel because the outer wards are compromised," he paused. "He doesn't know what it is. But he knows something's there. And if he gets to it before we do," Tonks began. "He won't," Harry said. He looked at her directly. "We're going tomorrow night and I need you to make sure the grounds are clear." She held his gaze for a moment. "Done," she said. "Go to bed. I'll process these 3 and have them secured before morning." Tonks, bed, Harry. But her expression was the gold-warm thing it went to when she was past professional and into something realer. "You did good work out here. So did you." "I know," she said, and the smile she gave him was small and real and meant only for him. He went back inside. Ginny found him in the common room at midnight. He'd come back and sat by the dying fire, not tired exactly, running on the adrenaline aftermath that he knew from experience needed somewhere to go before he could sleep. She came down the girls' staircase in her dressing gown and saw him and sat down in the chair across from him without asking any questions. They sat in the firelight for a while. "I felt it," she said eventually. "Through the bond. When you were running across the grounds." She looked at him. "Not fear. Absolute focus. Like everything got very clear and very simple." "It does," he said. "In those moments. Everything else goes away and there's only the next right thing." That must be both the best and the worst thing," she said. He thought about it. "It's the best thing about fighting and the worst thing about not being able to turn it off completely." He paused. "The moments between are when it gets hard." Ginny looked at him with the directness she always had, this girl who had known him since she was 10 years old and had spent most of that time being something other than herself around him, and was now, finally, simply herself. "Harry." He looked at her. "I need to say something that might be presumptuous." "You're never presumptuous," he said. "You're honest. Those are different things." She looked at the fire for a moment. When the thread hit me that night in the DA meeting, she said, I didn't tell you what it felt like because I wasn't ready to tell anyone. She paused. It felt like coming home. Not to you specifically, not as a thing I was waiting to tell you. More like the thing I've been doing for 2 years, building myself into someone who could stand next to you without losing track of herself, had worked. She glanced at him. Does that make sense? Yeah, he said. I'm not the same person who had a crush on the boy who lived, she said, with the confidence of someone who has done the internal work and knows it. I'm Ginny Weasley, and I play Quidditch better than most professionals, and I can cast 4 non-verbal spells, and I've been ready for this war since I was 12 years old and it nearly killed me. She met his eyes. That's who you're bonded to. Not the girl with the diary. Her. Harry looked at her, this specific person, built from everything that had happened and not diminished by any of it. I know exactly who you are, he said. She held his gaze. Then she stood up, straightened her dressing gown, and looked down at him with the clear, direct expression she'd been building for years. Good, she said. Then we'll be fine. She started toward the stairs. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be big. She went upstairs without looking back, which was, Harry thought, the most Ginny thing she could possibly have done. He sat in the dying firelight and felt the constellation settled around him, each thread distinct and warm and real, every person sleeping or on watch or reading somewhere in the castle, each of them here by something that had known what it was doing. He closed his eyes. The scar was quiet. Below, in the vault, Malachar waited in the dark with the patience of the genuinely old, and for once, the dark didn't feel like it was pressing toward anything malevolent. It felt like the dark before a necessary morning, uncomfortable and cold and full of things that couldn't be resolved until the light came, but finite. Tomorrow, the light was coming. Harry slept. Chapter 6, The Constellation Rises. They went down at midnight. Not dramatically, no torches, no ceremony, no speeches. Harry came down to the 4th floor corridor and found the others already there, arriving in 1s and 2s from different directions the way people do when they've independently made the same decision about timing. Hermione had the ancient magical containment text under her arm and a piece of parchment covered in notation she'd been working on since dinner. Luna had her glass vial again, the luminescent liquid inside brighter tonight than Harry had seen it, pulsing with a slow rhythm that matched, if he paid attention, the bond's ambient warmth. Tonks was already at the mirror, still in her aura gear but with something different about the way she was standing, less professional geometry, more personal. Present. Daphne arrived last, as she had a tendency to, and she had Fleur with her. This was itself a small event. They'd been seen talking in the library twice this week, and once walking back from dinner in what appeared to be a conversation that neither of them acknowledged publicly but both of them clearly continued privately. Harry had not commented on this. He'd simply noted it with the satisfaction of someone whose assessment of a situation had proved accurate. The grounds are clear, Tonks said, as Harry reached the mirror. I've had 2 sweeps since the incident last night. Nothing on the perimeter. Voldemort's people won't try again so soon, Daphne said. They failed reconnaissance. Their next step is analysis and replanning. We have a window. She paused. It won't be long. We won't need long, Harry said. He looked at the mirror. His own face looked back at him, and then he touched the frame with his wand in the sequence Kingsley had shown him. He'd memorized it watching once, which was something he'd stopped being surprised about himself, and the mirror swung open onto the dark staircase. The cold came up immediately, mineral and deep. Stay close, Harry said. And stay attuned. If anything feels wrong from below, tell me before you act on it. He went in first. The passage felt different the second time. Harry couldn't have said precisely how. The stone was the same, the cold was the same, the carved columns with their pulsing runic symbols stood exactly as they had 3 days ago. But something had changed in the quality of the air. Less inert. More anticipatory, the way a room changes quality when someone it's been waiting for comes home. He walked between the columns and felt the symbols respond to his wand light, not just registering warmth this time but brightening, each rune flickering to life as he passed, a slow illumination spreading outward from his progress through the passage. Behind him he heard Hermione make a small, involuntary sound. "The wards," she said. "They're responding to the constellation. All 7 of us together, they're recognizing the frequency." "The original council built this with the constellation in mind," Luna said, from somewhere in the middle of the group. "They hoped someone would come eventually. They built the hope, Indiana." The vault door was ahead. It looked both the same and different. The 6 broken locks were still fractured, the mechanisms splayed open like spent flowers. The 7th lock blazed with its cold blue light, pulsing with that deep slow rhythm Harry had noticed on the first visit. The people in the room arranged themselves without being directed, some instinct of the bond pulling them into the configuration that felt right. Harry was in front of the door. Hermione to his left. Fleur to his right. Luna directly behind him. Ginny and Susan flanking the outer positions. Tonks and Daphne at the rear, which put Tonks between Daphne and the staircase, a positioning that Harry noticed was partly tactical and partly the quiet protective instinct Tonks had been developing for everyone in the group over the past week. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the vault spoke first. 7. The word moved through the stone with a resonance that was different from Malakar's earlier communications, fuller, more structured, like something that had been conserving itself and was now spending freely. "I can feel all 7. After 400 years." A pause that had the texture of something very old taking a very careful breath. "You came." "We came," Harry said. "I thought you might not." The honesty in it was naked in a way the earlier conversations hadn't been. The performance of reasonableness was gone, and what was underneath it was simpler and considerably more human. "I thought, it has been a long time. I did not always behave in ways that made trust sensible." "No," Harry said. "You didn't." He paused. "But here's what I believe. I believe the 4 people sealed in here with you deserve better than to end when your seals fail. I believe you've had 4 centuries to understand what you did wrong, and I believe you've had that conversation with yourself more times than I can count." He looked at the 7th lock. "And I believe the magic that built this lock built it with a specific key in mind, and we're it." The silence from the vault lasted long enough that Harry felt the others' attention tighten. "Then, what do you want me to do?" "Tell me what the 7th lock needs," Harry said. "Your hand," Malakar said simply. "Yours specifically." "The anchors." The lock recognizes the anchor signature of a fully gathered constellation. Place your hand on the mechanism and it will open enough, only enough, for the fragment to be passed through. A pause. "It won't open fully. I couldn't open it fully from inside even if I wanted to. The resolution seal prevents it." "And you won't try to expand the opening," Harry said. Not a question. A statement of what was going to be true. "No," Malakar said, and there was something in it that was very tired and very honest. "I have been patient for 4 centuries, boy. I can be patient for 10 more minutes." Harry looked at the 7th lock. The blue light pulsed. He reached forward and placed his hand flat against the mechanism, and felt the cold of it, and then felt the cold change, recognizing something, assessing something, and then releasing. The 7th lock opened with a sound like a deep bell struck once. The vault door didn't swing wide. A section of it the size of a large book opened inward, and through the gap came light, not cold blue, but warm, amber gold, the specific color of something preserved rather than trapped, something that had been kept rather than simply stored. The fragment came through on its own. Harry stepped back. The crystallized piece of prima vis floated out of the vault gap at eye level, turning slowly in the air, a piece of solidified magic roughly the size of a large river stone, irregular in shape, catching the light from every angle and returning it changed. It was warm. Physically warm, like a coal that had never gone out. Behind it, through the gap, came 4 other objects. They were harder to describe. Not physical, or not entirely physical. They had the quality of photographs that had achieved something closer to presence, for forms that had spent 4 centuries in a space outside normal time and had been preserved by it rather than destroyed. 2 men, 2 women, their edges uncertain, their faces recognizable as faces without any of the usual hard boundaries. The 4 people sealed with Malachar. They passed through the gap and the vault door closed. The lock re-engaged with another bell note. Luna took a step forward. She looked at the 4 forms with her wide, particular eyes. "They're between," she said. "Not alive and not gone. The seal preserved them at the moment of containment." She looked at Harry. "The resolution will give them the choice." One of the 4 forms, a woman, dark-haired, with the still-present quality of someone who has been waiting with a great deal of composure for a very long time, looked at Harry directly. He held her gaze. "We're going to fix this," he said. She didn't speak. But she inclined her head, and the gesture was so human, so specifically the gesture of a person who has been treated like they didn't matter and is receiving basic dignity for the first time in a long while, that Harry felt it land somewhere deep. The voice from the vault was quieter now. More contained. "The resolution casting requires the fragment as the central point. You will place it between you and perform the synchronization Hermione Granger has been working out. The fragment will receive the synchronized prima vis and use it to establish a new seal, not a containment. A doorway. A pause. I will pass through it. The others will pass through it. What is on the other side?" The voice stopped. Started again. "I don't know what is on the other side. I have not known for 400 years, and I have had 4 centuries to make my peace with not knowing." "Are you afraid?" Harry asked. The silence was long enough to be honest. "Yes," Malachar said. "I am very afraid. I have been afraid of not existing since I was a young man, and I made every possible mistake in response to that fear." A pause. "I am still afraid. But I am more tired than I am afraid, and that, I think, is progress." Harry looked at the fragment floating in the air between him and the vault door. 900 years of accumulated magic, preserved in solid form. The seed of a casting that 7 people were about to perform together for the first time, under conditions that would have qualified as the genuine extremity the old texts required for consolidation if anything did. He looked at Hermione. "Ready?" She had the parchment out. She looked at it once, then folded it and put it in her pocket. "I don't need it," she said. "I have it." He looked at the others. Luna was already centered, her vial open, the luminescent liquid responding to the fragment's warmth with an increased pulsing. Fleur had her wand out and her chin up, and the expression of absolute purposeful certainty that was her specific contribution to everything she participated in. Daphne was standing perfectly still with her wand at her side, and when Harry looked at her she gave a single, precise nod that said everything. Ginny had the look she got before she caught the snitch, complete focus, completely alive. Susan's grief and her love were indistinguishable from each other on her face, and both of them pointed at the task. Tonks looked at him last, and she smiled, a real smile, the unmanaged kind, the one she gave when she'd stopped thinking about how she was coming across and was simply there. Her hair went gold, bright as sunlight, the color Harry had come to think of as her truest one. "Stop managing," Luna said softly, from behind him. Harry let go. Not of his wand, not of his awareness, not of the tactical map he was always running. Let go of the hand on the dial that regulated how much of himself was present. Let the full frequency come forward, the complete, unfiltered magical signature that he'd spent 15 years containing out of some instinct that loudness was dangerous and presence was a liability. The passage blazed. The runes on the columns ignited all at once, gold and warm, every ward in the passage activating simultaneously, the passage itself becoming something that was less like a tunnel and more like a channel, a designed space fulfilling its designed purpose for the first time in 400 years. The fragment lifted higher, moved to the center of their circle, and began to spin. The bond lit up. Not the warm ambient pulse. Something seismic, foundational, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the whole world holds its breath. Harry felt every thread simultaneously, felt each person at the end of it with a vividness that was almost overwhelming, each one distinct and specific and complete. Hermione's crystalline precision. Luna's infinite calm depth. Fleur's burning certainty. Daphne's cool, precise strength. Ginny's bright fierce aliveness. Susan's deep, grief-built love. Tonks's brilliant, fluid, uncontainable self. He felt them all attune. One by one, then all at once, each person locking to the frequency like instruments finding a chord, not the same note, not unison, but harmony, each voice distinct and each voice making the others more itself, the whole structure more real and more true than any of its parts. Expecto Patronum. He didn't plan to say it. It came out because it was the right thing, because the memory the spell required was everything in this passage right now, every person behind him and the warmth of what they'd built in 3 weeks from nothing, the absolute ground of it, the fact of it. The stag came. But this time the stag was different. This time it was made of the full frequency, the complete thing, and it shone with the light of every person in the circle behind it, Hermione's sharpness and Luna's depth and Fleur's fire and Daphne's clean precision and Ginny's brightness and Susan's love and Tonks's gold, all of it woven into the silver, which wasn't only silver anymore but a light that had no adequate name in any visual vocabulary. The stag lowered its head and touched the fragment with its antlers. The fragment exploded. Not destructively, it came apart the way a flower comes apart in fast forward, dissolving into its component light and releasing 400 years of contained prima vis all at once, and the passage was suddenly, completely, overwhelmingly full of it, this foundational magic, this first force, flooding the sealed space like water filling a vessel that had been waiting to be filled. The vault door dissolved. Not broke, not blew open. Simply ceased to be a barrier, the stone itself recognizing that the moment it had been built to precede had arrived. Malachar came through. He didn't look the way Harry had imagined, which he realized was because he'd been imagining something constructed from fear and the wrong proportion drawing. The actual man was just, old. Old in the way of something that has been waiting for resolution long past the point of natural exhaustion. He was tall, lean, with eyes that had the quality of deep water Harry had seen in the Fey Walker, unhurried and full of time. His face was ordinary, even kind, underneath the exhaustion of centuries. He looked at Harry. He looked at the 7 people arrayed behind Harry. He looked at the 4 forms that had come through with him, and for the first time his expression was entirely unguarded, not calculation, not patience, not performance. Something that had no strategy in it at all, just the naked relief of a man who has been carrying something unspeakable for 400 years and has finally been allowed to put it down. "You did it," he said, and his voice in the air rather than the stone was human and rough and very, very tired. "We did it," Harry said. Malachar looked at him for a long moment. "I misjudged what you were," he said. "I thought the anchor of this constellation would be someone who could be managed. Guided. I made my plans on that assumption." "I know," Harry said. "I was wrong," Malachar said, and it came out as respect rather than regret. The magic didn't choose someone who could be guided. It chose someone who couldn't be stopped. A pause. That is, I think, the correct choice. The 4 forms were becoming more present, less between, more here. The dark-haired woman who had inclined her head to Harry had tears on her face that she wasn't trying to hide, which was, Harry thought, a very reasonable response to 400 years of waiting. The prima vis was moving through the passage like a tide, and where it touched the old ward stones it was rewriting them, not new wards over old ones, but a genuine resolution, the original structure completing itself, the hope the original council had built in finally finding its anchor. Harry felt the casting draw from him, and let it. Felt it draw from each person behind him, each of them giving something specific, Hermione's precise knowledge of the magical structure shoring up the framework, Luna's temporal clarity giving the resolution its direction, Fleur's purposeful certainty making it irrevocable, Daphne's shielding instinct wrapping protection around the four newly freed souls, Ginny's fierce aliveness giving the whole thing momentum, Susan's love, wide and deep and completely offered, giving it the foundation it needed to last. Tonks changed shape. Not into anything specific, into every shape she'd ever worn, cycling through them in rapid succession, and in doing so she gave the resolution its final element, the thing it had needed all along. Not a fixed form. Adaptability. The capacity to meet what came without being destroyed by it. The ability to change without losing the essential self. The passage sealed itself. Not with locks. With light, warm amber gold light that settled into the stone and became part of it, permanent and structural, the way a well-made thing looks like it could never have been otherwise. The vault was gone. The space where it had been was ordinary stone. And Malachar and his four were simply present. In the world. The debt between them and existence settled, the account cleared, the thing done. In the silence that followed, Hermione sat down on the passage floor. Not gracefully. She sat down because her legs had decided that the structural magic they just conducted had used up whatever reserves had been keeping them functioning, and the floor was right there. Harry sat down beside her without thinking about it, and Luna folded herself into the available space on his other side, and gradually the others assembled in the passage floor in the easy arrangement of people who have just done something enormous together and have temporarily run out of the energy for posture. Malachar sat apart, with the four others, speaking to them in low tones that Harry didn't try to hear. The dark-haired woman was gripping his hand. He was letting her. "Are you all right?" Ginny asked the group in general. "Spectacular," Tonks said, from a position that suggested she was lying with her back flat on the passage floor. "Absolutely fine. Completely normal evening. I feel like I've been turned inside out and back again," Fleur said, with the precision of someone describing a medical symptom. "But correctly. Like something was the wrong way and is now the right way." "That's the consolidation," Hermione said, from Harry's shoulder, because apparently she'd decided his shoulder was a reasonable surface and he had no objections. "The full consolidation. We did it. The extremity condition was satisfied and the fragment activation completed the cycle and she paused. "We actually did it." "I told you," Luna said pleasantly. "You did," Hermione admitted. "You were right about most of it." "Most? The parts one haven't verified yet I'm reserving judgment on." "Of course," Luna said, the serenity of a person who has all the time in the world to be verified. Daphne was standing slightly apart from the group on the floor, still upright, because apparently Daphne's instinct for composure was structurally load-bearing. But her arms were uncrossed, and her expression had the particular quality of something very tightly held for a long time that has finally, carefully, allowed itself to be slightly less tight. Susan was looking at the space where the vault had been, and her expression was the one Harry had come to know as her grief made useful, focused and clean and pointed at a future she intended to effect. Her aunt was alive. The war was still going. She was here, and she was changed by being here, and the change was going toward something. Harry looked at Malachar. Malachar looked back. "What will you do?" Harry asked. The old man, and he was old, comprehensively and irreversibly, in a way that had nothing to do with any vanity or desire for youth, considered the question. "There are things I know that should be known," he said. "About old magic. About the war you're fighting and the creature at its center." His eyes moved briefly to the space between Harry's eyebrows, where the scar was. "I know what he did to make himself what he is. I've known for 6 centuries. I was the first to successfully attempt it and the first to understand how wrong I was about what it would cost." The passage was very quiet. "Horcruxes," Harry said. Malachar looked at him steadily. You know the word. I've been learning. Then you know the method must be reversed before the creature can be ended. A pause. I know the reversal. All of them. Every method, every weakness, every point of vulnerability in each variety of anchor object. He held Harry's gaze. I'm offering this freely. No negotiation, no exchange. Simply, he paused, a man paying a debt he's owed for 900 years. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then, Hermione. Already writing, she said, from the floor. He heard the scratch of quill on parchment begin. They came up from the passage at 2 in the morning. Dumbledore was in his office. The light was on. Harry had been watching for it and it had been on since midnight, which suggested that the headmaster either had excellent information networks or the castle itself had told him what was happening below it. Harry suspected both. He knocked. Was told to enter. Went in, and the others followed him, which apparently surprised Dumbledore. His expression moved through something quickly and was composed again by the time Harry reached the desk, but not quickly enough. Harry, Dumbledore said. Malachar has been resolved, Harry said. He put the notes Hermione had taken, 8 pages of rapid, dense notation, on the desk between them. The vault is gone. He and the 4 people sealed with him are free, and the prima vis has resealed the passage permanently. He paused. He's offered his knowledge of the Horcruxes in exchange for nothing. I accepted. Dumbledore looked at the notes. He looked at the 8 people behind Harry, 7 of the Constellation plus Malachar himself, who had come up through the passage with the composure of a man who has learned that composure is not the same as concealment and had chosen it anyway. Dumbledore looked at Malachar for a long time. Malachar looked back without flinching or performing. Just looking. 900 years of history and one night of resolution meeting whatever Dumbledore was measuring him by. I've been trying to find those weaknesses for 30 years, Dumbledore said, quietly. I know, Malachar said. I've been watching. You were close on 4 of them. He looked at the notes Hermione had produced. The rest required a framework you didn't have. The anchor magic of a soul constellation is the only lens clear enough to see them. He glanced at Harry. He has that lens now. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression Harry hadn't seen from him before, something that was past the protective calculation he usually operated with, past the strategic warmth, into something genuinely personal. Something that was almost grief and almost pride in a combination that had never been offered to Harry before. You should have told me, Dumbledore said. About the vault. About what you were planning. I told you after, Harry said. Harry, you've been making decisions about what I should know for 15 years, Harry said, and it came out level, not angry, which was better than it would have been 6 months ago. I'm not criticizing every choice you made. I'm telling you that I'm past the point where I wait to be informed. I'll keep you involved because you're valuable and because you genuinely care about the outcome, and I'll tell you after when I need the autonomy to move without the additional process of convincing you first. He held the old wizard's gaze. That's how this works now. The office was very quiet. McGonagall, who was standing by the window exactly as she had been on the earlier visit, made the small sound again that was almost certainly agreement. She then appeared to decide she hadn't made it and looked out the window with great interest. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he picked up the 8 pages of notes and began to read, and as he read his expression moved through something that was astonishment and something that was relief and something that might have been, quietly and privately, the specific happiness of a man who has been carrying a war for 30 years and has just been handed the map to its end. Sit down, he said, without looking up. All of you. This will take some time to go through and I want everyone present for it. They sat until 4 in the morning. Malachar talked about Horcruxes with the exhaustive, encyclopedic knowledge of someone who had invented the concept, hated the invention, and spent 9 centuries understanding exactly what he'd made. Hermione wrote. Harry listened and cross-referenced and asked questions that made Malachar pause twice, not from confusion but from surprise, the look of a teacher encountering a student who has grasped something before being told it. The fragment objects Harry was already aware of, the diary was gone, destroyed in second year without him understanding what it was. The ring was known. The locket, the cup, the diadem. The snake. And the last one. The one Malachar described carefully and with the specific gentleness of someone delivering news that they know is going to land hard. Harry felt it land. He didn't flinch. He didn't perform composure. He simply sat with the shape of it, the way truth always felt when it was the kind that couldn't be taken back, and let himself feel it fully and then chose what to do with it. Around him the constellation felt the shift in his frequency. He felt them respond, not with alarm, not with protective urgency, but with the specific quality of people who are present and steady and not going anywhere. The ground he'd been finding over the past 3 weeks, solid under his feet. "I know," he said, when Malachar had finished. "You suspected," Malachar said. "I suspected," Harry agreed. "There is a method," Malachar said carefully, "that does not require," he paused. "That does not require the anchor to be lost. It requires the soul fragment to be extracted and destroyed separately from the vessel. It is complex and it is dangerous and it has never been attempted on a living person." He looked at Harry. "But you have something I didn't when I was building this framework alone. You have 7 people whose magical capability, synchronized through the constellation, is equal to any task I can describe." Harry looked at the 7 people in the room, some in chairs, some on the floor, Hermione still writing, Tonks leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her expression fiercely, protectively certain, Fleur straight-backed and resolute, Daphne with her hands still and her eyes completely clear, Luna looking at nothing specific with the expression of someone who had already seen this moment from several angles and knew how it resolved, Ginny watching Harry with the steady aliveness that made everyone around her feel more real, Susan with her quiet, devastating strength built from everything she'd lost and was not going to let be wasted. "I know," Harry said again. "That's why we're here." Dawn was coming in through the office windows when they finally stood to leave, gray and cold and absolutely indifferent to what had happened in the building below it, the way Dawn usually is. In the corridor outside, Harry stood for a moment and felt the morning come. The bond was different now. Fully consolidated, not louder, but clearer, the way a signal sounds when you tune it properly. Each thread distinct and unambiguous. He could feel Hermione's mind still processing at full speed beside him. Luna's clarity, already oriented toward the next thing. Tonks's warm brightness, tired but essentially unchanged, essentially itself. Daphne's cool precise attention, slightly warmer at the edges than it had been 3 weeks ago. Fleur's fire, banked but constant, always there when it was needed. Susan's depth, building toward something that the war was going to feel. Ginny's brightness, patient and complete and entirely itself. "Harry," Hermione said. He looked at her. She was standing in the corridor with the notes folded in her hands and the expression of someone who has run the calculations and arrived at an answer she has complicated feelings about and has decided to have those feelings honestly. "We're going to win," she said. Not cheerfully. Not with the performed confidence of someone who needs to believe it. With the flat, certain tone of Hermione Granger having completed an analysis. "Yeah," he said. "It's going to be terrible first," she said. "There are things ahead that are going to be the hardest things any of us have ever done." "I know. But we're going to win." She looked at him steadily. "And you're going to be here at the end of it. I need you to know that I've done the research and that is not wishful thinking. That is the conclusion the evidence supports." He looked at her, this person who had been the first thread named, who had been at his side since he was 11 years old and had apparently been building the case for his survival in parallel with everything else she'd ever done, because that was who Hermione was. "Okay," he said. "I believe you." She nodded once, precisely. "Good." She tucked the notes under her arm. I'm going to get 3 hours of sleep and then spend the morning writing this up properly. Obviously. She went, and as she went she passed Ginny, who was coming out of the office, and they exchanged a look that was its own entire conversation in a language Harry was only beginning to learn, and then Ginny came to stand beside him. She's right, Ginny said. She usually is. Annoyingly. But she said it with warmth. They stood in the corridor as the others filtered past, Luna with her quiet smile, Susan with her steady nod, Daphne with the thing she did now that wasn't quite a nod and wasn't quite a smile but occupied the space between them that was hers specifically. Malachar paused when he reached Harry, and they looked at each other, and there was no performance in it from either side. Thank you, Malachar said. Don't do anything else worth sealing you for, Harry said. Something moved in the old man's face that was, unmistakably, the beginning of a genuine laugh, a thing Harry suspected he hadn't had cause for in several centuries. I'll endeavor, he said, and moved on. Tonks was last. She stopped in front of him in the corridor with the dawn coming in at the end of it, her hair the same bright gold it had been in the passage, which Harry was increasingly convinced was the color of her at full amplitude. All the adjustments and modulations she usually made for professional contexts and social contexts and the various practical disguises of her daily life stripped back to the baseline of who Nymphadora Tonks actually was when nobody needed anything from her. She looked at him for a moment. We should talk, she said. About what comes next. Not right now. But soon. Yeah, he said. Not about the war. About, she gestured at the space between them. I know what you mean. I know you know. She paused. I'm not going to be weird about it. You were never weird about it, he said. You were honest about it, which is different. She looked at him with the expression she had when she was deciding whether something was accurate or generous, and had landed on accurate. There it is, she said, quietly. That thing you do. What thing? Where you tell people the true version of something they've been misreading as a fault. Her expression was complicated and direct and completely open. You've been doing it since we met. I don't think you realize you do it. Harry thought about that. Is it useful? It's essential, she said. She reached out and briefly, firmly, pressed his hand once. Then she turned and walked down the corridor toward the castle's exterior, back to her security sweep, back to the order, back to the daily business of a war that was still happening and would continue to happen until the work he'd started tonight was finished. Harry watched her go and felt the constellation settle around him, each person dispersing toward sleep or study or duty, each thread warm and clear and present. He turned and walked toward the Gryffindor Tower. The castle was waking up around him, early risers beginning to move through corridors, the kitchen starting its work below, the portraits coming to life in their morning routines. Hogwarts at dawn had a specific quality he'd never adequately described to anyone, something that was particular to a building that had been full of young people learning things for 1,000 years, the accumulated energy of all that becoming and discovering soaked into the very walls. He passed a window and stopped. The grounds were gold with early light. The forbidden forest was dark at the edges and illuminated at the canopy. The lake was the color of pewter, flat and still, and the mountains beyond were blue and enormous and entirely indifferent to the concerns of wizards, dark lords, sealed sorcerers, soul constellations, and 15-year-old boys who were discovering, somewhat inconveniently, that the thing they'd been most afraid of their entire life was not danger or death or Voldemort but the possibility of being known. He was known. By 7 people, each of whom had been found by the oldest magic in Britain and had come anyway, had stayed anyway, had become something specific and real and theirs in the process. He was known, and it hadn't destroyed him. It had, improbably and against considerable odds, done the opposite. He thought about what was ahead. The Horcruxes, one of which was a problem with a solution that was going to require everything the constellation had and then some. Voldemort, building his forces in the dark. The Ministry, still insisting that none of this was real. The war that was coming, fully and finally, because wars that were only coming were always, eventually, here. He thought about all of it. He was not afraid. Not because he'd convinced himself there was nothing to fear. Because the fear and the ground existed simultaneously now, and the ground was real, and when both things were real the fear became something you moved through rather than something that held you still. He turned from the window. He walked up to Gryffindor Tower, and the castle walked with him in the way that old buildings walk with their inhabitants, the slight temperature change that was the building orienting toward him, the torches burning slightly warmer, the stairs declining to be awkward. In the dormitory, Neville and Ron and Dean and Seamus slept the uncomplicated sleep of people who were not currently responsible for ending Dark Lords. Harry sat on his bed and opened the bone-colored book to the last section, the one he hadn't read yet, the one past the consolidation mechanics and the historical records and the council's sealed notes. It was short. A single paragraph in the same Latin as the rest, but with a quality to the writing that was different, not analytical, not procedural. Someone had written this the way you write things you want to remember. He translated it slowly, using the vocabulary he'd been building. The constellation is not a weapon and was never meant to be. It is an answer to the question that darkness always asks, whether love is strong enough to matter in the presence of destruction. The prima vis formed the first constellation when the first darkness arose. It will form the last when the last darkness falls. The anchor does not fight alone. The anchor never fought alone. This is not a comfort. It is the oldest and most fundamental fact of magic. Love, given freely and received honestly, is the only force that has no ceiling. Harry read it twice. Then he closed the book, lay back, and let the morning come. Outside, the war waited. Inside, the constellation breathed, 7 people and an anchor, improbably assembled, impossibly ready, beginning the long, difficult, necessary work of ending what had been waiting to be ended since the night a baby survived something that couldn't be survived and the oldest magic in Britain looked up and took notice. The stag would sing again. Not yet. But soon.